Before we descend into the terrifying tale, don't forget to subscribe, where true horror stories and real creepy encounters come to life in the dead of night. Like this video if you dare to hear more, and drop a comment below. Where in the world are you listening from? Is the darkness of your room making your eyelids heavy? Or are you too scared to sleep? Let's see who's brave enough to stay awake for what's next.
Rings. Cold grazes fat on the corpse of summer's dew. True. I rip off a chunk of bread and toss it to her. It would be easier. She catches it with both hands and disappears behind a curtain of hair. Face, bread, and all. Squatted down, hunched over like a gargoyle, growling as if someone might try to steal it. My wife. My eyes burn and I turn away. Try to focus on the little blue and green lights darting in and out of the branches above our heads. It's a good plan. Clever, efficient, and cruel. I trace my finger down the trunk and sigh. They haven't done anything to deserve death. I watch her rip a bite loose and swallow it whole, searching for any hint of compassion. But we need it for Baba Yaga. She raises her chin, stares at me with eyes I barely know, eyes too wide to be human, too deep, too golden. Go lick, hooves on the snow. There's the lip fungus that tastes of toe butter. Strangers thee? I shake my head. It's not that kind of tree. If it was, the pixies wouldn't have nested here. But she does have a point. In fairy, you can never be too cautious. Glancing up at the pixies, I crouch down, flop open my pack, and grab my notebook. It's not much. Well, it wasn't much where we came from. Just a Christmas gift. The standard, hey, you're a writer, here's a notebook. But now, it's everything. A leather-bound record of everything we learned since we came here. Everything we encountered. A sort of field guide of how to survive in fairy. Unbuckling the cover, I flip to the section on trees. The sketches I made. Bark patterns where they grow. The shape they take. The look and size of their leaves. It all sounds scientific, but it's not. The trees here aren't all safe. They aren't all trees. Some are shapeshifters waiting for passing prey. Some actual trees long to be more and release pollen that lulls you to sleep. Then they feed on your dreams. Live through your imagination. And those are the more benign leafy predators. I find what I'm looking for. Compare the notes I made about willow trees, how to tell if they're safe. The curtains of moss, the low wide branches, the pixie nests. It all fits. See? I hold up the book for her to look at. Tube grubs slither in the moonbeam. She snorts and goes back to her bread. Yeah. I squeeze the book closed with one hand. Right. Slip the strap through the buckle and toss it back in my pack. You don't read? I forgot. Not really. It's not like you can forget. Your wife's a goblin. I mean, you look at her and that's what she is. From her frog-like yellowish skin to her freakishly long fingers. The fact that she hobbles around in a loincloth, just a loincloth, and oh yeah, never says anything that makes any kind of sense unless you've spent a serious amount of time in a goblin den. No, I didn't forget. I don't know what it is. Stubbornness? Refusal to accept the truth? That the woman I married, the woman I love, is gone? I'm not sure. But I'm going with hope. As it turns out, goblins don't mate. They don't have babies. They sort of infect other creatures with a kind of virus. You catch it, you turn into a goblin. And there is no cure. At least I haven't found one. Yet. Closing my pack, I peer up at the branches and watch the lights circle and dance among the leaves. Awful lot of pixies up there. Grubs sing of muck and birds of air. A smile pulls at my lips. Thanks for the vote of confidence. But she's not wrong. It's been a long time since I climbed a tree. Still, if I rid my pixies right, the nest should be... My gaze follows an outer branch back to the trunk, to a large bulge in the crotch, where a little pink pixie stands, at the mouth of a hole in the bark, gripping the edge of the opening as if her life depends on it. My brow peaks. It must be her first flight. Leveling my finger at the nest, I whisper, "See? Right there. I glance down at the wife. Told you. She belches, turns her head up toward the branches, at me, and snorts. Fish farts. Thanks. Sighing, I work my way around the base of the tree, looking for a branch I can reach. Just don't miss the signal. Play your fife and you can hold the ring for a while. She flashes a wide-fanged grin, the kind a cat might give a mouse, and jerks the fife from inside her loincloth. Gold. Gold. My voice cracks. The one word that actually somewhat describes what she's talking about. Her wedding ring. I try to tell myself that it's not about the gold. That somewhere behind goblin greed she's still in there. That some part of her remembers the meaning behind the ring. That I love her. That I'll stand by her no matter what. But I'm not sure that part exists anymore. Of course. I managed to find a little burl to use as a foothold, hoist myself up, and hook a hand over the top of a branch. That's assuming the pixies don't turn me into a vole first. I swing up my other hand, push off the trunk, lock my legs around the branch, a bit like a sloth, then squirm, twist, and shimmy my body up on top. It's not easy, but from here on the branches look more in reach. No problem. The pixies, on the other hand, I watch the dancing balls of light drift away from the trunk. Some vanish into the leaves, others seem to congregate around a ball of leaves out in the thin branches. I swallow hard. It's a distraction. A test to see why I'm up here. If I take the bait, they'll know I'm after the nest, and then it's vole time. Which they'll do anyway if I get too close. Even if I wasn't here for the nest, and that's the rub. I am. Faking a yawn, I lay down on the branch, fold my hands behind my head, and pretend to close my eyes. It takes a bit, but eventually the pixies go back to their slow, circling dance. I don't move, not for another half hour or so. And when I do, I sit up, rub my back, roll on my side, then sit up again, trying to make it look like I can't. Get comfortable, before climbing up to the next branch and repeating the process, over and over, until I'm laid out on my back just 2 branches below the nest. Close enough to see the pleats in the pink pixie's dress, the way she has her bottom lip wedged between her teeth, the rapid rise and fall of her little chest as she stands there in the opening, clinging to the side of the nest, terrified. It's time. I turn my head just enough to catch a glimpse of the wife out of the corner of my eye, picking her toes with the fife. My jaw goes tense, but it's not her fault. I've been at this for hours. Anyone would get bored. All I can do now is give the signal, hope, and pray. I suck in a deep breath and cough. Streaks of light rip through the air like a rainbow tornado. Below, the wife shouts, "Gold chirps, vain clouds, gold chirps, vain clouds." The fledgling pixie jolts, loses her grip, and falls, shrieking like a bit rabbit. And that's when I see it. Her broken wing. Without thinking, I stretch out my hand and catch her. As if on command, the pixie swarm stops. 1,000,000 tiny balls of light surround me on all sides. 2,000,000 eyes, all locked on me. Heart pounding, I sit up, gaze fixed on the maimed pixie peering up from my palm with wide, frightened eyes. Frightened enough to use the only weapon a pixie has, the magic that sustains her. Magic enough to turn me into a vole, but at the cost of her life. Slowly, ever so slowly, I push myself to my feet, hold my cupped hand to the mouth of the nest, and wait. Completely at her mercy. Everything blazes in perfect clarity. The soft tickle of the pixie's hands and knees against my palm. The sweet scent of nectar on the air. The eyes of the hive boring into me. The shrill, incessant screams of the wife below, begging me to drop the ring before they turn me, and it with me, into a vole. I don't know how long I stand there, barely daring to breathe, but after what feels like an eternity, 2 tiny pink hands peek over the edge of my thumb, followed by a tiny pink head. The pixie fixes her brilliant blue eyes on mine, blinks, then opens her mouth, takes a deep breath, and in the smallest, most innocent voice I've ever heard sings, "Holy fuck. You scared the living shit out of me, asshole. What the hell are you even doing up here, you hairless, anus-licking troll?" But I can't answer. It's like talking to a foul-mouthed angel. Her face, the essence of childlike wonder. Her voice, gossamer silk. Ear butter. I'm not even sure what's happening. I didn't even know pixies could talk. Gold chirps vain clouds. Gold chirps vain clouds. Gold chirps vain cluedas. The wife shrieks from the bottom of the tree. And a vein over my right temple throbs. Not a single worry about me. No. Just drop the ring. Oh, I see. The pixie's eyes widen. She glances around at the swarm of fairies surrounding us and yells, "Dipshit over here doesn't understand words." She scrambles up on the edge of my thumb. Arms out, palms up, she shouts very slowly, "Why? R." She drops her shrug and levels her index finger at my nose. "You." Points at the sky. Up. Waves her hands at the branches, pixies, everything. "Here." Then she bends over and points at her backside. "Asshole. Gold. No chirp vain clouds." The wife calls, and behind me a pixie snorts back a laugh. Somewhere deep inside of me something cracks. I hate this place. I can't even take a leak without some carnivorous grass, vampire deer, or spiteful gnome trying to kill me. Every time I find something pretty, it's cursed, poisonous, vicious, or just plain nasty like you. My voice shakes. "Yeah, I saw your ripped wing. That's why I caught you. I could have let you fall, but I didn't. I don't expect a thank you or anything, but every muscle in my body twitches. I hate this place. I hate Oberon. I hate what he wants me to do." I lower my hand so I'm staring right at her. "I need a jar of pixie nectar. That's what I'm after. I had hoped to get it without any fuss. That's why I spent half the day creeping up here." Without breaking eye contact, I slide my other hand into the inside pocket of my vest, pull out a small, warm glass vial filled with dancing flames, and hold it up for all of them to see. I have a flask of dragon's breath. I didn't need to do it this way. I could have just uncorked it, killed all of you, and helped myself, but I figured if I just took my time, I could get what I need and get out without any drama. Live and let live, but now, I sort of just want to watch you burn. And that's when I hear it, the venom in my voice. The same darkness that permeates everything here. Everything I hate about this place, but mine sounds even thicker, darker. Dark enough that the pixie shrinks back behind my thumb. And there I am. A giant threatening a tiny girl cowering in the palm of my hand. An even darker hatred takes me. I hate me. I hate what I've become, that I was willing to take Oberon's bargain. Tearing my gaze from the pixie in my hand, I glance down at the wife, still hopping and screaming at the base of the tree, and cough. The wife takes one last leap, cocks her head to the side, and blinks. I cough again, and finally she seems to notice the fife in her hand. She glances up at me, presses the armature to her lips, and blows. The pixies scream, clap their hands over their pointy ears, and dart off into the canopy. Another ear-piercing shriek sends goosebumps racing across my skin. "Wonderful, dear," I shout, trying not to wince as I slip the dragon's breath back inside my vest and fumble for an empty flask. "Keep playing." Her face splits into a wide, dagger-toothed grin. She blows again, and another wail from the pits of hell assails my ears. Taking the cork between my teeth, I open the empty vial and plunge it inside the pixie nest. I can't see what I'm doing, but warm, sticky fluid runs over my knuckles. Below, the wife spins in a circle, dancing as she tortures every creature in earshot with her demonic playing. Somehow she plays a chord, one that nearly renders my arms useless, a tritone. A chord so foul it was once banned by the Catholic Church. And another, I thumb as much nectar as I can into the mouth of the vial and jerk my arm out of the nest, jaw tense. It shouldn't even be possible. It's a fife. A fife. It only plays, one note at a time, and yet another. Convulsing in auditory agony, I scramble down the tree as fast as I can and hit the ground only a few feet from the wife. But she barely seems to notice. Enraptured by her music, ears on fire, I hook a thumb under my necklace, pull the ring from under my shirt, and give it a shake. "Gold." She stops playing. "Gold?" Tucks the fife back in her loincloth and licks her lips. "Shadowgrass?" "Absolutely." I slip the chain up over my head. "That was the best I've ever heard you play. She beams, and for a moment the woman I married leaks through. My chin shakes. She's still in there somewhere. She's not gone. Not entirely. A deep, resonating buzz draws my gaze back to the branches, to the swarm of furious pixies emerging from the canopy. Crap. They recovered sooner than I thought. We gotta go. Now. I don't wait for her to argue. I grab her hand and run. Through thorns and thickets. Over stones and logs. Until at last the angry buzz vanishes. Lost in the rush of windswept pines. Until I'm certain we're not being followed. Only then do we stop. In a cedar grove beside a small spring. I crouch down, steady my breathing, and listen. Crickets. The flow of water. The wife's rasping purr. I stroke her knuckles with my thumb, and her cold, slimy hand slips from my fingers. No pixies. I sigh. We made it. Gold fang round. Twig not but sour over cream. Right. Gold. How could I forget? I hand her the ring. But I'm not. Sure, I heard that last part right. What is what? She takes the ring in both hands, runs her tongue around the edge, and just like that, the woman I married is gone again. The crow barks nude in the winter sun. She levels a long, spindly finger at my sleeve, at the tiny, trembling pixie clinging to my shirt. A pixie with a missing wing. Just seeing her there is like a punch to the gut. Oh no. Gently, as I can, I pinch her under the arms, pull her off my clothes, and set her down on a rock. Why didn't you get off? How could I? She huffs, throws up her arms, and screams, I can't fly. Out of nowhere, you just start flinging. Your arms around, I thought I was gonna die. She flops down on her backside, wipes her nose on the back of her hand, buries her face in her palms, and starts rocking back and forth. What are you gonna do with me? My mouth goes dry. I don't know. I can't take her back. The other pixies would turn me into a vole on sight, and with a broken wing alone, she's as good as dead. If I took you close enough to your tree, can you walk the rest of the way? She peers up over her fingertips with wide, bloodshot eyes. Don't you know anything? You took my wing. I can't leave you. Soft ground wheat snarls in the bog of fetid tusks. I glance over at the wife. She licks the ring and shrugs. I'm surprised she remembers. It's old lore, almost forgotten on Earth, but essentially, if you remove a fey creature's wings, it's bound to you. Crap. My head throbs. I don't know why this sort of thing keeps happening to me. It's not like I go looking for trouble. I pinch my nose, desperate to clear my thoughts. There is something I recorded in the notebook shortly after we first came here, but I can't remember. I let go of my nose and squint down, at the distraught three-winged pixie rocking back and forth on the rock. But I can free you, right? The pixie nods. Yeah, if you gave it back. But after your mad dash through every freaking bush in the forest, good luck finding it. She gags. You hear that? I can't even use words you don't like, you funning piece of ship. She hugs her knees to her chest, a sobbing, glowing pink ball, so pathetic that for the first time in my life I actually hate not being cussed at. Eagle dung eats voles. I tear my gaze from the pixie just in time to watch the wife slip the ring around her tongue. Yeah, I know. Pushing. To my feet, I glance down at the pixie. There's nothing for it. She's coming with us, and she won't like it. Heck, I don't like it. Look, I'm sorry. If I can find another way to free you, I will. But we need to get going. You can ride on my shoulder, in my pocket, or wherever, but we have to go. It doesn't matter. She sniffs back a sob, takes a deep, trembling breath, and throws up her hand. Your shoulder's fine, I guess. The merchant buzzard. Gills ate green pus, slathered on cookstones of the gathering fish. No, I don't think so. I pull the branch a little lower and squint up the side of the mountain, at the ornate wagon making its way down the switchbacks. The carvings on the side are definitely troll make, but the driver seems far too small for a troll. The pixie tugs at my hair. What is it? A merchant, I whisper out of the corner of my mouth. A troll, I think. A troll? Her face twists into a disgusted grimace. You're gonna trade with a troll? Me? No. Being human, I'm not exactly welcome in civilized society. The wife, yes. The pixie glances at the wife and snorts. Oh, this should be fun. Her voice twists into a guttural snarl. Maggot, juice grass of the water and snow. Her voice goes back to normal. And what if it doesn't speak goblin? Did you even think about that, eh? Her face goes red. Her arms clamp against her sides. Grasshole. Her whole body slumps like even getting that out took everything she had. Tossing her a sympathetic smirk, I go back to watching the wagon. It's a merchant's wagon. Goblins are always looking to trade for gold, shouldn't be a problem. It rounds a switchback, and for a split second, the driver's long, warty nose pokes out of its hood. Fire farts? The wife grunts. Fire. Farts. I let the branch go, the warmth already seeping from my fingertips. Wait, the pixie chirps. What does that mean? What are fire farts? Well? I scratch the back of my neck. We don't have a lot to trade. Only one thing. Actually, I raise my hand to my shoulder, palm open. The pixie doesn't move, just folds her arms over her chest. I cough out a laugh. I'm a human and fairy. Everything hates me, which makes me a freaking gold mine. Her brow curls into a question mark, but I don't give her the chance to ask. I'm going to leave you here with the pack. Me? Even if we didn't need supplies, that troll's probably already caught my scent. She steps onto my palm. I slip a strap from my shoulder, set her down on a branch, and drop the pack against the base of the tree, a carnivorous pine, judging by the needles, but not dangerous until nightfall. Trust me, it's safer this way. For everyone but me, that is. I squat down beside the pack, open the flap, empty my pockets, and fumble through our supplies for a coil of rope. I find it at the bottom. My stomach churns at the sight of it, but it could take weeks to track down the supplies we need, and Oberon. My hands shake as I toss the rope to the wife. Oberon isn't known for his long attention span. We can't risk the weight. Gold? Huh? Oh, the ring. Right. I slip the chain over my head, stroke the ring with my thumb, and hang it from a broken twig beside the pixie. Can't let a troll get its hands on that. I force a laugh, but my voice cracks. Smoke falls on the winter snake. The wife tugs at her hair, never taking her eyes from mine. Kiss the squirrel, but do not inhale. I know, but it'll be fine. I cup her cool, damp cheek in my palm and fake a smile. It'll be fine. Wait, the pixie squeaks. What's the rope for? But I can't say it. Stay here and keep quiet. It'll be fine. I swallow the lump forming in my throat. It'll be fine, just don't leave this spot. Her mouth opens as if she's about to argue, but then snaps closed. Good. She can't disobey a direct order. Not since I took her wing. And I hate playing the slave master, but I can't risk this going sideways. It'll be fine, I whisper, more to myself than to her, push to my feet and offer my hands to the wife. We need foxglove and hemlock. Gold? The question hits like a blow to the gut. Yes, you can hold the ring for a while, if you get foxglove and hemlock. She sucks her bottom lip between her teeth, pinning it in place with a row of daggers. Small wheat molds on the shores of milk. It has to look real. My breath comes in shallow gasps. Get into character. We both need to play our part. She rocks back and forth before looping the rope over my hands, humming to herself, falling into character. Her smile sharpens. Her eyes take on a menacing cast, and the pixie cocks her head. I don't like this. We've done this before. It'll be fine. I offer what I hope looks like a reassuring smile, and my attention shifts back to the wife. I watch her feed the slack through the knot, her back curled in a hunch, her tongue caught between her teeth, so goblin-like goosebumps prickle down my spine. Remember, I whisper, and her hands fall still. For a moment the facade cracks, The wife stares out at me from behind the goblin's golden eyes, and my heartbeat slows. Foxglove and hemlock. Mandrake if you can, but don't get distracted. The wife lowers her chin. A low snarl rumbles in her chest, and when she smiles again, all hint of compassion is gone. Only greed, only cunning and violence. Red? Red. I glance. Back at the cart rumbling down the path and my knees shake. I can't do this, not again. Heartbeat pounding in my ears, my gaze darts to the woods, the pixie, the rope around my wrists. The wife. There's no trace of the woman I love in her eyes. No softness in her smile. I'm nothing. A human lost in fairy. A goblin's prisoner. Meat. Without thinking, I turn and run. The wife jerks the rope so hard it knocks me to my knees. Charlie sat on Starlight's kiss. Coward. I don't know if it's the blow or the insult that settles my thoughts, but she's right. I am. So much so that it takes everything I have just to look at her, to scramble back to my feet and steady my breathing. Enough to remind her, it has to look good. Her pointy ears droop like melted wax. She turns away. Darkness weeps. She moans. Then spins and backhands me across the face. Pins and needles flash through my cheek. The taste of blood fills my mouth. But she's holding back. She doesn't want to hurt me. She's afraid to. I cup her cheek in my palm and say the only thing I can. Coward. She sniffs, nuzzles into my hand, pulls away and tries again, using her claws, a clenched fist. And when I fall, she rubs dirt on my face and clothes. Only, then does she take the rope and drag my limp body down to the path. Sticks rip at my chest. Rocks and pebbles dig into my sides and back, and then it stops. The rope goes slack. I roll over onto my back just in time to catch the outline of a huge woolly beast lumber to a stop. What this? A shrill voice calls, followed by several long sniffs. Human? The wife hunches over me, glares back over her shoulder, and, to translate, says, Nay, not human. Mine human troll flesh. Me finds him, me eats him. Mine. From her seat on the wagon, the troll smacks her tusks. Finesies, keepsies, but gold I have, goblinkin. Trade? Yes? Gold for man flesh? The wife turns toward the troll. Gold, I? The troll barks out a laugh. Yes, gold. Gold trinkets, baubles, coins, and all. 1 piece for every mouthful. Again, her tusks clack. Is it fresh? Good price? Fair price. The wife's cat-like eyes find mine, but her face is a mask. I have no idea what she's thinking. No way of asking. Fresh as breathing, she growls. But too hungry me be to trade meat for gold. Aye, even gold. Without warning, she snatches my arm and pinches my bicep between her claws. Could use a bit of tenderizing, aye? Her head jerks back to the troll. Herbs for a hit? Needs a beating, does he? The troll howls out a long, choking laugh. That be better still. Name your wish, goblinkin. Hemlock, foxglove, and mandrake. That be 3 good hits. Over the wife's shoulder, I watch the troll drag her claws through the stubble on her chin. 5 hits where, ear eyes like, 4, but no skull or crotch meats. The wife stretches out a foot and pushes my head to the side. Baba Yaga be wants this one on her fence, aye? The troll coughs up a ball of phlegm and spits it in my face. He does got a nice round dome, don't he? Her voice fades in a low wheeze, nearly drowned by the squawk of her seat as she lumbers down from her perch. Done. 4 hits, 3 herbs. The wife cackles out a high-pitched laugh, hops sideways and tosses the rope up over a branch. Good hits for good herbs, she sings. Obeying the tug of the rope, I clamber to my feet. She wraps it around the trunk and pulls it taut, working out the slack with each tug. Until my feet swing. I grab the rope to keep it from cutting into my wrists. It's a trick we learned after hunting down the ingredients for a spell. One Oberon gave us that should have reversed the wife's transformation. After a redcap pinned me up against a wall and broke 3 of my ribs. If I'm hanging, I can't get pinned, and if I swing right, they can't get a clean hit. Good. Good. The troll falls into a crouch when she hits the ground, her face hidden in the hollow of her hood. All but her long, warty nose and chin. But it's her fist I can't look away from. The size of it. The size of her. All 3 meters of her. She fixes her glowing green eyes on me and my lip twitches. 4 hits, and I get everything we need. It's only 4 hits. I clench my jaw, preparing for the first blow. It's only 1 more beating. I swallow hard. Just 1 more time. She plants her feet, draws back, and throws her weight into the punch. I jerk my legs at the last instant and swing with the blow. Her fist glances off, but it's like getting hit by a truck. Pain explodes down my side, forces the air from my lungs. The canopy spins like dark claws against the pale pink clouds overhead, fading shapes that dim as I gasp for breath. Out of the corner of my eye, I catch the outline of the troll drawing back her arm, timing her. Next punch to match my swing. I kick to the side, but her fist gets me in the gut. Everything vanishes in a flash of light, then goes dark. Bile burns the back of my throat. I retch. The troll's laugh echoes all around me. I can't see. Fire explodes down my back. My body convulses on its own, and I almost lose my grip on the rope. Dim shadows pierce the veil of darkness. Shapeless, then horrifyingly clear as I spin. The forest, the troll, the wagon, the beast pulling it, and then the wife. Her mouth curled in a jagged sneer, her golden eyes gleaming. Her ears pricked high. Still in character, I clench my jaw and kick sideways. The troll's last blow glances off my hip, barely touching me at all. Tough one, the troll pants. Not so much as a squeak. Hope's not too tough for chewing. The wife's sneer sharpens. The troll clacks her tusks. No tellin'. Till the feast's begun, she lumbers to the back of her cart. Deal's a deal. Head spinning, lost in pain, I watch the wife scamper after her on her knuckles. Like the goblin she is. I try a shallow breath. Pain stabs at my side, but I don't groan. Don't make a sound. Not until the troll mounts her cart and rolls away. Only after she's out of sight, after the wife unbinds my hands, do I sit up and check the damage. Only then, as the wife dances around me laughing, gold smells sticky on the waters of id, do I test my voice. That depends. I press my fingertips to a row of angry purple welts, where the troll's knuckles landed, and wince. Did you get everything we need? She pulls 3 little cloth bags from her loincloth and holds them out, beaming. Gold? I wipe the blood from my chin, let my shirt drop, and struggle to my feet. Yeah, you can hold the ring. She rubs her palms together, hopping back and forth like an excited puppy. I try to force a smile, but I can't. I just can't. All the way to the fen. Potions. How did you even get here? I stop and glance back at the wife hobbling along behind, licking her wedding ring as she scrambles over the rocks and exposed roots underfoot. Then at the pixie on my shoulder. Well, it wasn't by choice, if that's what you mean. I shift the pack off the bruise under my shoulder blade. The pain dulls and I take a deep breath. Sorry. But I'm not sure if it's the pain that's made me surly, or knowing where we're headed. The wife and I were out hiking, saw a ring of mushrooms and thought it would make a cool picture. The pixie's little brow wrinkles. I know what she's about to say. That everyone knows fairy rings are doorways to other worlds, but I cut her off. No, you don't get it. Magic is dead there. There are no pixies, no trolls or goblins, no dryads, nymphs, or anything else. Fairy rings are nothing but an underground fungus that sends up mushrooms around its edge to spore. There's nothing mystical about it. The only tie they have to fairy is a bunch of old stories nobody believes anymore. It never even occurred to me it was a portal to another world. It was just supposed to be a stupid picture. She folds her arms over her chest and shakes her head. Duckling Oberon. The wife leans up against my knee, gives the ring a loud slurp and wraps her arm around my thigh. Patting her head, I hold out my hand, asking for the ring. What about Oberon? The wife glances up at me at my hand. then slips the ring from her tongue, dries it in her loincloth, and lays it in my palm. The pixie watches me slip the ring back on its chain and over my neck in utter silence, as if thinking. Magic can't die, she says at last. And it's never gone. It's how you humans think that's the problem. It's like... Her face screws up into an adorable knot. Fish. Go to any pond, look at the water, and you only see you. The fish is there, but you can't see it because your reflection is in the way. That's what humans are like. And you weren't always such bass poles. You used to know that things you couldn't smell, hear, see, taste, or touch are still real. Now you only see your reflection. Doesn't mean the fish isn't there. It is. It's not even hiding. You're just not seeing anything but you. The wing she still has twitches. You felt something magical about that fairy ring. That's why you had to get inside it. You didn't know what, because humans are slipheads. But you felt it. That's why you wanted a picture. That's how you got here. Oberon called you. Snails walk on sunbeam bread. The pixie throws up her arms. Then I'm not eating it. Why do you even talk to me? I blink down into the valley below, at the twisted husks of leafless trees looming out of the fog. You mean the wife eating that goblin-infected peach? The chance encounter with Oberon where he offered us a chance to return home, for a price. Everything we've been through. It was all for what? Entertainment? The pixie shrugs. Yeah, he's a She huffs out a breath. Fudge and deep stick. Like, this one time, he gave this human a donkey's head and put a spell on Queen Tatiana so she'd fall in love with him, just because he thought it'd be funny. The wife rips out a long, loud fart and the pixie slaps her forehead. Why? Just why? Lovely. Like I needed more reasons to doubt Oberon. I slip the pack from my shoulders, giving the pixie enough time to step over the strap before I squat down and open the flap. The problem is, according to every creature we've talked to, everything I've learned, Oberon's the one who controls the portals. Unreliable, cruel, and childish as he is, he's the one we have to deal with. I know he's a crapshoot, and that's on a good day, but there is no other option, no matter how much I wish there was. Which means we have no choice but to keep to the mission. The trouble is I never liked his price. I never liked myself for agreeing to it. And now that we're here at the edge of the fen, out of the corner of my eye I catch the wife stuffing a booger between her cheeks and my train of thought shatters. She tosses me a sheepish grin, like she's expecting me to yell at her, but I gave up on hygiene a while ago. You have the herbs? Her brow furrows as she struggles to make sense of what I'm asking, then her eyes go wide. Her hand plunges into her loincloth and emerges holding 3 little burlap pouches. Good girl. I run my fingers through her wiry, greasy hair. She shrinks back smiling and drops them in my hand with a purr. Tossing the pouches on the ground, I fumble through the supplies for my notebook. Page 47. A protection spell I copied out of a Neod's grimoire, while she was trying to keep the wife from, well, I'm not really sure what, but it had something to do with her supply of toadskins. Sometimes it's best not to know. The pixie leans forward. What is that, magic? I didn't know you were a wizard. I'm not. It's a bit of green magic I got off a Neod, mixing herbs and things. No magic required, just the right ingredients. It's not even magic in the strictest sense. It won't make us invisible or anything, just uninteresting. If we draw attention to ourselves, it won't help at all. And this one is species specific. I run my finger down the list. Pixie nectar is the base. I know the ingredients for goblins and humans, those I memorized, but I only remember one ingredient for pixies, hemlock. And only because I thought pixies were fairies' version of wasps. A protection potion against the undead for wasps struck me as so ridiculous, it stuck with me. But that was before. Now, salt check, wormwood check. Luckily, the pixie formula isn't all that different. I have everything she needs too. I dig out my mortar and pestle, a few empty jars, and lay out the herbs I need for each potion in 3 piles. I mix the wife's first. Here, drink this. Without hesitation, she tosses back her head and downs the bottle in a single gulp. Next, the pixie. Your turn. She blinks at me like I'm insane. The whole thing? That's when I realize the bottle's as big as she is. I glance back at the notebook. I don't know if the Nead planned on dosing the whole hive or what, but I followed it to the letter. Maybe just one swallow, like ours. I guess we'll have extra. I tip the bottle so she can sip what she wants, then cork it and slip the rest into my vest pocket. Now it's my turn. I mix the potion and take a sip. It's, not bad actually. Kind of an earthy carbonated lemonade. I down the rest and stuff everything back inside the pack. Now I guess we'll see if this potion is worth all the trouble we went through. Son of a bee's itch. The pixie's face twists into the cutest scowl I've ever seen. It's the Fen. You don't know that potion does anything and you're gonna walk in anyway? Do you even know what's in there? Yes. But even as the word leaves my mouth, my cheeks burn. It was Oberon who told me where to find Baba Yaga. That the Fen was a bulge in the veil between worlds, a pocket filled with the restless spirits of the dead. But that was before the red cap, before the wife's failed cure, before a lot of things. Let me guess, Oberon. He told you where to find the Nead, right? When I don't answer, she rolls, her eyes. You've got to be farting kidding me. I groan against the pain in my hip as I stand. Okay, fine. It was Oberon, but he wants Baba Yaga dead. That much I do believe. And we can't kill her if we can't get to her. The pixie's jaw drops. Is that what you're doing? She pinches her nose and falls silent. In fact, she doesn't make another sound. Not until we reach the edge of the mist. Then she clears her throat. Baba Yaga's the only thing in Fairy Oberon doesn't control. He can't stand it. That's why he wants her dead. She whispers it so soft that I stop to listen. He knows you don't stand a chance. I mean, sure, if you somehow pulled it off, he'd be happy. But he doesn't expect you to. Putting you, a human, up against her? It's an execution. Probably. Thinks it's funking hilarious watching you fight to stick your head in the guillotine. She wipes her nose on the back of her hand. Normally I wouldn't care, but you took my wing. I'm bound to you. You die. I die. Her eyes flick back to the wife, hobbling over a fallen log. For her, it'll be worse. She'll live. That's worse? She shakes her head like I'm the biggest moron she's ever met. Have you ever seen a goblin give up their gold? No, she does. Every time you ask, no problem. Think about it, shtickhead. She's a goblin. Who gives you her gold? The wife somersaults down the hill behind us, coming to a stop beside my leg. She pushes her wiry hair from her face and smiles up at me. Butt hairs sway in the cold, dank air. My eyes burn. The pixie's right. I know she is. But I don't have a better option. No other way to get our lives back. Yeah, I saw. That was a cool roll. I force a smile and pull her head to my thigh. Stay close, I don't want to lose you. The fen mist presses in all around us, too thin to bar our passage, too thick to breathe without effort. It fills my mouth with the taste of rotten flesh. Shadows lumber past, barely seen groaning things. Creatures of the grave, according to Oberon, restless horrors that haunt the twilight realm between dream and nightmare. I can't see anything. How do you know where you're going? The pixie's hissing whisper sends goosebumps prickling down my back, but I don't answer. I don't want to shatter the potion's shroud. Even now, creeping along as quietly as I can feel eyes on my back, watching as we slip deeper into the mist. Whatever the potion does, it's not a shield, not even a disguise. It feels more like high school. Walking past the jocks, staring at the floor, and praying they don't notice you. A vaguely human shape limps across our path, barely shrouded in mist. It sniffs, jerks to a stop, and raises its nose. Sniff, sniff. The pixie gasps. The wife's claws dig into my thigh. Patting her head with one hand, I press my index finger to my lips with the other. The pixie tosses me a murderous, "I told you so," scowl, crawls over my collar and hides behind my neck. The shadow turns and, still sniffing, creeps closer. A shriveled hand comes into focus. A tattered sleeve. A mutilated leg, more bone than flesh. Ribs showing through a gash in its shirt. A skull covered here and there with bits of flesh, but no jaw, no eyes. All of him rotten. He lumbers closer. Until not even the mist stands between us. Heart pounding, I stand still as stone. All but the hand stroking my wife's hair, to comfort her. Her hand slips from my thigh, but I can't tear my eyes from the nightmare before me. The corpse shuffles close, draws a single deep sniff and bends down with his head still raised. The hole where his neck vanishes into his chest widens. A snake-like tongue lashes out of his collar, and that's when I realize it's not a corpse. It's a Vitala, a vampire of the soul, a creature of madness, fear, and darkness without substance in the mortal realm. But here in Fairy, very much so. The potion's useless. Sweat trickles down my forehead. I step back, mind numb, choked by a single, horrible thought. The pixie was wrong. Baba Yaga was never meant to be our executioner. We were never meant to make it that far. The Vitala stretches out its arm, fingers twitching, still sniffing. I step to the side. It lurches forward, then stops and sniffs. Vitala hunt by smell. I swallow hard. My stupid brain finally lurches back, into motion. Like everything else in Fairy, it's me, the human it wants to kill. And just like trading, I can use that to my advantage. Thinking fast, I remember the snot rag in my shirt pocket. If I wipe my face and toss it into the mist, maybe the smell of my sweat would give us a chance to make a run for it. If not, I still have the dragon's breath. I lick my lips. It's not a great plan, but it could work. It has to. I step again. A stick snaps underfoot. The Vitala cocks its head to the side. Every muscle in my body goes tense. It doesn't just smell, it hears too. Not even daring to breathe, I sidestep back to where I was when we started this dance. The Vitala makes a grab, but I'm not there. It swings its arms wide, and I creep back out of reach, slipping my hand inside my vest. Into my shirt pocket. I pinch the snot rag between my fore and middle fingers. An ear-piercing, hell-spawned shriek rakes up my spine like lightning. My gaze drops to the empty place at my side, where the wife should be and isn't. Another shriek assails my sanity. The Vitala roars, falls on its knees, but I know that sound. The wife's fife. I'd recognize it anywhere. An impossible chord sends the hair on my back prickling. The pixie screams and the Vitala rips the skull from its shoulders. But it's the other howls that freeze the blood in my veins. Too many to count. Too close. To evade. Without thinking, I grab the pixie and drop her in the pocket with the snot rag. Schmooze. Dogs pee bright in the sands of Nod. Another tritone rapes the stillness of the fen. Wincing at the unholy chord, I run toward the wife's frantic shouts. Her shape explodes from the mist. Fife in hand, eyes wide, her finger pointed at something behind me. Jelly. Following. Her command, I duck. The Vitala's skull whizzes by my ear. Without stopping, I snatch her hand and keep running. Shadows move all around us, howling, sniffing shapes that dim in the thickening fog. Desiccated hands groping in the mist. Fingertips brush my sleeve. I jerk right, squinting into the mist. 2 yellow lights prick through the fog. 2 more beside them. My heart skips the next beat. I know where we are. Without a word of warning, I tighten my grip on the wife's hand and bolt toward the lights. Another skull zips by my head, this one with a jaw, its mouth open, a single giant eye lodged between its teeth. The mouth closes and opens like a giant eyelid. The eye spins, locks on me, and the skull vanishes into the fog. A chorus of howls echo all around us, and I get the uneasy feeling that a lot of Vitala saw us through that single eye. No sooner than the thought crosses my mind and I slam into some unyielding object. A kaleidoscope of color flashes before my eyes and then nothing. The rule of 3. Sugar swims free. feeds silk-laden gold. Gold, gold, gold. A tiny huff echoes in the dark. Is that all you can think about? Geese is priced. I crack open one eye. Lurid shapes dance amid spinning balls of blinding yellow light, and I shut it again. Oh, my head. I press a palm to my temple just to keep the world together. Where are we? A hoarse voice answers from above. Lost. His memory he did. Most unfortunate, a smooth voice replies. Well, Pixie, aren't you going to answer him? An old woman's voice scolds. If you ever shut up, the Pixie shouts. You're a rude little harlot, ain't ya? Quite so. Why, I never. The old woman's voice gasps. And after we took care of those nasty beasts too. Most ungrateful, the smooth, intelligent voice agrees. What, now? Rubbing my temple, I sit up. My head aches almost as bad as the bruises the troll gave me, but I take a chance at opening my eyes again. Hi. The Pixie leans over to peek under my hand and smiles up at me with puffy, bloodshot eyes. You okay? I think so. And that's when I notice what she's standing in front of, what I ran into. A wall of posts. My gaze travels up the nearest post, all the way to a bleach-white skull impaled on its top. A skull staring down at us with glowing yellow empty eye sockets. There we are now, the skull says in an old woman's voice. All woke up? A shiver ripples down my back. I knew about Baba Yaga's skulls, but knowing isn't really the same as talking to one. But unsettling as it is, I have an even bigger worry. Where's the wife? Get your stinking claws off of me, you filthy creature. A hoarse voice pulls my attention to another skull, one impaled a few posts. To the left, with the wife's finger lodged in its eye socket. Ah, there she is. Despite everything, I laugh. Sorry, it's your light, it's golden. I slip the chain over my head and dangle the ring like a hypnotist. Gold? The wife shakes the hair from her face and scampers to my side, clapping. I toss her the ring, watch her lick its curve. I think we owe you our thanks. At last, a creature with manners. The intelligent-sounding skull turns and nods at its fellows. Think nothing of it, dear boy. I help the Pixie to my shoulder, then struggle to my feet. Newton et al. Why, it's our job to keep them nasty brutes away from her Yaga nest now, ain't it? We had our eyes on you for a while now, dear. Didn't think you'd make it. The old woman's skull nods. One time I'm glad to be wrong. I can't stop smiling. I'd forgotten how nice it is to be treated like a person. Thanks. I glance back over my shoulder, but from here the mist is different. Still there, but only in hair-like strands where it swirls over itself. Every tree, every creature, everything clear as day. I assume, the intelligent skull drawls, that you are not fool enough to enter the fen without purpose. His jaw slides side to side. Having been human ourselves, we bear a certain sympathy for the plight of any man unfortunate enough to find himself in fairy or woman. The intelligent skull glares at the old woman's for a moment. Yes, quite. He clears his... Well, he doesn't have a throat, but something. As I was saying, regardless of our sympathy, we are the guardians of the lady's realm. As such, I must ask, why have you come? And no lies. This glow your goblin friend be fined and so intoxicatin' don't cotton to no lies. I'm afraid that's true, dear. Speak true or be burned to ash. I'm terribly sorry, but those are the rules. I scratch an itch behind my ear. The truth it is. I just want to go home. Lead a normal life. The intelligent skull's eyes narrow. Very true. The posts bend into a gap I can step through. I nod my thanks and drape one leg over the threshold, but his voice pulls me to a stop. A word of caution. I smell the Fey King's scent on you, friend, if you come on his behalf. He pauses, as if considering his words carefully. Well, I will simply say Baba Yaga is no friend of Oberon, and leave it at that. Baba Yaga. Step through into a little courtyard. Green, manicured, a flower garden filled with daisies, violets, and daffodils, and at its center, 2 enormous chicken legs. Licking my lips, I gape up at a little brown hut perched where the chicken should. Do fat maggots sing? I have no idea. I hate to admit it, but when Oberon told us about the fen, it seemed like the bigger problem. I never even thought about getting into the hut once we got here. So, being an incurable nerd and former gamer, I do the only thing I can think of. Cup my hands to my mouth and shout a line I remember from an old video game. House of Brown, now sit down. The hut raises one leg and scratches the other. Please? Without hesitation, the hut squats down, like a hen on its nest. Can't believe that worked. Swallowing hard, I creep up to the front porch, wondering how much leaked from this world into mine. How many of the tales I read about Baba Yaga are true? How much I already know. Laying my hand on the rail, I give the wood a pat. Thank you. The door of the hut swings open. Holly truck, you're really going in there? Swamp candy. Scrambled brains go bad in the hot, hot sun. Scrambled brains. The pixie tosses the wife a murderous glare, but it melts into a panicked-looking frown. I heard she eats pixies, and human liver steaks dipped in troll pus with a side of goblin eye jelly on rye. The voice jerks my gaze to an old woman in a blue dress and red apron standing in the doorway. Talk. Always talk. But words that be more than but noise. She wipes her hands in her apron and motions us forward. We shall see. Numb, having no clue how to act, I give her a slight bow and follow her inside. But given the tales about her house is nothing like what I expected. There's a small wooden table, a little fireplace with a kettle boiling in the flames, a single bed in the corner under a window, well made and covered with a patchwork quilt. There's a counter, with a wash basin under another window, cupboards above and below, a row of pots and jars on a shelf over the door. If I had to describe it in a single word, I'd say, homey. Baba Yaga closes the door. Strange triad, Baba. She pinches a tuft of the wife's hair and rubs it between her fingers, never taking her eyes off me. Aye, very strange, Yaga. To go home, it said. To lead a normal life it wants. She lets the wife's hair fall and steps close enough that I can feel her breath on my face. Love, I feel, Yaga, of the goblin kind. And the stink of Oberon's cruelty, Baba. She sniffs at the pixie. Ah, the crack of the master's whip, I hear. She draws back and licks her lips, humming in a low cackle. But no answer given to the question we asked. Why have you come, man-child? Before I can answer, the wife's slimy fingers slip into my hand. Forger's dice and rats grow thin on wind and rain. Small flies chew stone. Weep, young man, weep, and know the dawn has teeth. Firefly. I give her hand a squeeze. She's right. I don't know what it is, the tone of Baba Yaga's voice, the scraggly old woman beard, headscarf, or the way she talks to herself like she's two different people in one body. But she does remind me a bit of Grandma. More than a bit, actually. It's uncanny. My chest aches, I can't do it. Maybe if she was the evil witch I read about, but I can't kill her, it'd be like killing Grandma. Wiping the tears from my cheek, I glance at the window over the sink, at the snow-covered pines beyond the glass, then into Baba Yaga's patient, piebald eyes. I don't know what she'll do to us. It doesn't matter. She's just like Grandma, and even if she wasn't, I don't trust Oberon. At all. I slip my hand free of the wife's grip, stuff it inside my vest, and pull out the vial of dragon's breath. Baba Yaga's eyes narrow at the sight of it, but before she gets the chance to speak, I clear my throat. Oberon sent us here to kill you with this. He said you were an evil old crone and we'd be doing both worlds a favor. In exchange, he promised to restore my wife and transport us home to the exact moment we left. On my shoulder, the pixie sniffs, raises her chin as if preparing for a hit. But I'm not done. I want to go home. Without thinking, I reach down and drop the vial into a pocket on Baba Yaga's apron. But I'm not a killer. She stares down at her pocket. Dragon's breath be powerful indeed, powerful enough to stop poor Yaga's heart? She raises her head. And yours, had you used it. She hobbles to the door, muttering to herself. No daughters, Baba, sadly. But not all sons be fit for the fire, it seems. Grabbing the door by the hinge, she swings it open and motions us forward. Outside, the sun shines over a cow pasture in late spring, peppered by flowers, flanked by trees, bending softly in, the wind. And closer, just off the porch, a fairy ring pokes through the grass. Home. My eyes burn. Is it? Baba Yaga nods. Where you was and when. And worry not about your kin, the goblin poison be left behind. She levels a finger at the pixie on my shoulder and her smile fades. That we cannot undo. Bound you be, and so together you must go. She lowers her hand and her eyes sparkle. Daughters be better than sons, Yaga. Name her Pixie, for that she ever be. I rub my eyes, not sure what to say, what to think. Baba Yaga smiles. Go on home and rest. Numb, I stagger through the door, drop down on my knees, and kiss the soft, cool grass. Honey? I raise my head. Watch, my wife rub her fingers down her human forearm, her auburn hair blowing in the wind, a beautiful little red-haired girl at her side. I want to run to her, hold her, but I can't move. I can barely breathe. It's like a dream. Go tell your father that we be just fine and be coming to call soon. Wait. I glance back at Baba Yaga's voice, at a door frame standing alone in the field. Just the sight of it sends my head reeling. I can't think. Not even as she waves, steps back, closes the door, and vanishes into myth.
As we pause before the next dark chapter, true horror stories and real bone-chilling encounters await in the shadows. Like this video to summon more tales, and leave a comment from which corner of the world are you listening. As the night grows colder, do you feel sleep tugging at your soul? Or are the whispers of my stories keeping you trapped in the waking world? Share your secrets below.
The Wire, Between Worlds. The house that Mateo Morales rented sat alone at the edge of a rust-colored bluff, where wind carved ridges into the earth and telephone poles leaned slightly eastward, as though drawn toward some invisible point past the horizon. He had chosen it for its silence, but also because it was far enough from anything that no one could come looking, unless they already knew what to ask for. That privacy had become necessity. Inside, the air smelled faintly of chalk dust and old sweat, the relics of a time he no longer acknowledged except in dreams. A coil of rope sat atop a wooden crate by the window, untouched for over a year. The balancing pole leaned against the wall nearby, gathering dust where the grips had once blistered his palms raw. He had not stood on a wire since the fall. The mornings came cold in the desert, and the sun through the slatted blinds did little to warm the room. Mateo stood in the kitchen nursing the same mug of black coffee he had refilled twice without sipping. A news radio station murmured low in the background, but the words failed to form meaning. His attention lingered instead on the manila envelope sitting on the counter, unmarked except for a wax seal pressed with a symbol he did not recognize. A thin, vertical line crossed at intervals like a ladder set aflame. He had found it the day before, left on the porch without a knock. No courier, no signature, no tracks in the dirt. Now, with reluctance more instinct than decision, he cracked the seal and unfolded the heavy parchment within. Mr. Morales, the time has come to return what was never finished. The wire remains. You are summoned to complete what others abandoned. The towers are prepared, the wind is watching. There was no contact number, no signature, only a set of coordinates, and beneath them, a line rendered in italicized script. Cross where others turned back. For a long moment, Mateo stared at the page as if it might alter its meaning the longer he observed it. Then, setting it down with care, he crossed to the bedroom and opened the small fireproof box beneath his bed. The photograph inside was folded at the corners, worn along the creases. It showed a younger Mateo, barely 20, standing between his father and grandfather. All three wore performance silks and harnesses. In the background, a wire stretched between two scaffolds set over a darkened stadium crowd, scarcely visible, beneath the stage lights. Agustin Virelli had died during a canyon walk in 1975. Mateo's father, Emilio, had died performing a tribute to that final crossing in 2004. Mateo had nearly joined them, a slip saved by a frayed safety tether that left him with a shattered hip, a fused ankle, and a ruined career. And still, the wire had found its way back to him. His phone buzzed once on the kitchen table, jolting him back into motion. The name on the screen froze him. Veronica Morales. He let it ring once more before answering. "I'm guessing you know why you're calling." Her voice came through sharp and tired. "I saw the article in the Santiago paper. Someone's staging a walk. They're calling it ceremonial. You haven't, Mateo, tell me you haven't already agreed." "I just got the letter." "You're not going, right?" He turned from the window as if that might grant him the clarity to lie. "I haven't decided." There was silence on the line, then softer. "You remember the last time you were called to do something like this?" "That was different." "No," she said. "It wasn't. It was dressed up differently, that's all. They always are. Different sponsors, different justifications. But the wire stays the same." He said nothing. His gaze drifted again to the invitation. To his chagrin, the phrase, "the wind is watching," had embedded itself in his mind. "I still have the articles," Veronica continued. "Old blueprints from your grandfather's walk. You know how it ended, but no one talks about how it started. He got an offer like this, too. Same kind of phrasing, same kind of nowhere." Mateo let his eyes drift shut. The coffee had gone cold in his hand. "I think I need to finish it." "You don't need to finish anything. You're not responsible for what they didn't walk." "But maybe I am," he said. Her voice shifted into something lower, pleading. "If you go, promise me something." He waited. "If anything feels wrong," she continued, "feels wrong, not looks wrong, you turn around." "I'll keep that in mind," he said, but neither of them believed it. He flew out the next morning with a single bag and no return itinerary. The ticket had already been paid for. A man in an airport uniform handed it to him wordlessly after passport control. The flight took him south along the spine of the Andes. At one point, the clouds outside the window thinned, revealing what he believed for a moment to be a thread, stretched impossibly high above a distant ravine, too thin to be real but unnaturally straight. When he blinked, it was gone. There were no other passengers. When they landed at a military airstrip near the Chilean-Argentine border, the sky had begun to darken. The pilot did not speak as Mateo disembarked. Another man waited by a waiting jeep, dressed in black with no insignia. He nodded to Mateo, opened the passenger door, and drove without a word. The road turned to gravel, then to dirt. Hours passed in silence, the terrain flattening into a red plain surrounded by peaks the color of rust and ash. Distant dust devils spiraled in slow columns. Twice they passed herds of vicuñas standing stock still, as though posed. Finally, they crested a hill, and Mateo saw them. Two towers black as obsidian, rising from the center of a canyon choked with shadow. Between them, barely visible in the fading light, stretched a thread of silver. It did not sag or tremble. It shimmered faintly, as though resisting the world. Around it, the driver pulled to a stop. Mateo opened the door and stepped into the cold wind, the smell of iron rising from the dust. The invitation had not mentioned a name. No plaque marked the towers. There was no scaffolding and no nets. There was only the line suspended in the void, waiting. He did not smile or pray. Instead, he reached into his bag and withdrew the gloves, and took his first step toward the wire. The helicopter came for him at dawn. It was already waiting on the ledge above the canyon when he emerged from the bunkhouse, its rotors ticking in place as if it had been there all night. The pilot did not introduce himself. He simply gestured toward the open door, and Mateo climbed in without comment, ducking low beneath the spinning blades. The flight took only minutes, yet the air changed as they descended into the basin. Dry, heat giving way to something thinner and older, as though the wind had scraped across too many forgotten things on its way there. The towers came into view again, larger now and stranger in proportion. From a distance they had seemed constructed, artifacts of steel and purpose, but up close their surfaces betrayed no seams, bolts, or welds. Each rose from the red bedrock like a single solid extrusion, the color of wet volcanic glass. No ladders, no stairs, no maintenance lines. Just vertical smoothness vanishing into the morning sky, impossible to scale without aid, and anchored in no visible foundation. Between them stretched the wire. Matteo scrutinized it through the open side window, eyes narrowing. Its shimmer bent the lines around it. He could see the canyon floor on the other side, but only as if glimpsed through agitated water. The wire was too long for its diameter, too thin to maintain that tension unaided, and yet it hung perfectly taut, unmoving in the wind that buffeted the helicopter's frame. When they touched down on the platform carved into the south ridge, a figure awaited him. Tall, suited in pale gray, holding a clipboard with nothing on it. The man's face was forgettable in the most literal way. Even as Matteo studied it, the features refused to cohere. There was a mouth, and perhaps a mustache, a faint outline of cheekbones, but everything else blurred the longer he looked. "Welcome," the man said in a tone that carried no accent, as though it had been scrubbed clean. Matteo stepped out, shoulders hunched against the wind. "Are you with the Foundation?" The man's smile stretched but did not rise to his eyes. "The wire remembers you." Matteo froze. "I didn't say that out loud," he muttered. "No," the man agreed. "You didn't." The man turned and walked toward the nearest tower, where a narrow outbuilding had been built into the rock face. It looked like a converted storage shed, aluminum siding, a power unit humming beside it, a cluster of empty folding chairs stacked under a tarp. As they approached, a second figure emerged from behind the generator, wiping grease from his hands. This one wore coveralls stained at the knees and carried the unmistakable posture of a man waiting to be dismissed. He said nothing, nodding at Matteo. The gesture was slow, almost uncertain. Matteo glanced at the generator. Someone had spray-painted a line of graffiti in crude black strokes across the metal casing. The words were in Spanish, and though weathered by sand and sun, they remained legible. "El que cruza dos veces no regresa igual." Matteo translated silently. "He who crosses twice does not return the same." Inside the shed, they handed him a key card, a printed schedule, and a clipboard with a liability waiver already signed. None of the staff spoke more than a sentence or two at a time. Their eyes were alert but distant, and once or twice Matteo thought they were looking slightly to the left of him, as though tracking someone beside him instead. One man handed him a water bottle and whispered something under his breath, too quiet to catch, but repeated in the same rhythm a few moments later by another worker across the camp. At first, Matteo assumed it was a coincidence. Then it happened. Again, an echo of a phrase he hadn't spoken aloud but had only thought in passing. "The wire can't be supported at this length." Minutes later, a woman in a jumpsuit muttered the exact words while passing behind him. He turned, but she kept walking. The training area had been demarcated with orange tape and weighted cones. An insultingly small strip of wire stretched between two steel supports just 3 meters above the canyon floor. Matteo stood beneath it, arms crossed, watching it vibrate in the breeze. It wasn't remotely similar to the main wire. This one obeyed gravity and tension, behaved as expected, and gave no shimmer to the air around it. He climbed up once, tested his balance, and then descended without a word. For the next few days, time unraveled in threads too loose to measure. The sun seemed to rise too fast and fall too slowly. Meals arrived at inconsistent intervals. His watch would skip ahead and then return to the hour he'd thought had passed. He began writing timestamps in a notebook, only to discover later that half the pages had already been filled with shaky versions of his own handwriting, recording entries he didn't remember making. Each night, the wind picked up and pushed hard against the towers. The sound that came through the canyon was not a howl, but something subtler. Matteo would lie in the bunk and listen, eyes open, trying not to hear the footfalls he swore sometimes accompanied it. The dreams came on the third night. He stood on the wire, not the training wire, but the true one. the span that stretched over the canyon. Below him, the world rotated, and above him, stars blinked and scattered. He stepped forward, and with each step, the tension in the wire reversed direction, as though he walked not across it, but beneath it. Then he saw the figure, upside down, walking the underside of the wire with perfect balance, its arms outstretched in a mirror of his own. Its face was hidden by the dark, but its feet made no contact with the wire. They hovered a few inches above, yet it advanced all the same. Matteo awoke before it reached him. By the 5th day, he no longer trusted the mirrors in the washroom. His reflection lagged slightly when he moved, adjusting with a faint blur, then catching up as if embarrassed. He stopped shaving. When he tried to photograph the wire at sunset, the image came back inverted. The towers bent inward, the wire curving in ways the lens should not have captured. The photo erased itself minutes later. He stopped sleeping with the light off. On the 7th day, he stepped out near twilight and turned toward the far side of the canyon, hoping to clear his thoughts before rehearsal. The wind was low, the sun just beginning to slide behind the mountains, casting a wash of amber over the ridgeline. And then he saw it, not in the air or on the wire, but in the rock face opposite. The sun's position had painted a faint mirror of the entire camp onto the canyon wall, distorted and faint, but visible. He could make out the outline of the south tower, the antenna dish, even the fold-out bunkhouse where he'd been sleeping, and, across that reflection, blurred by heat and distance, a figure walked the wire. It moved slowly, knees bending ever so slightly with each motion. It raised its arms and tilted its head, all with perfect form. Matteo blinked hard and looked at the actual wire. It was empty, and yet the reflection still moved. The knock came just after midday, a soft triple tap against the aluminum siding of the bunkhouse. Matteo had been resting in the corner near the cracked portable fan, not sleeping, but not fully alert either. He blinked, sat up slowly, and stared at the door. It came again, more insistent this time. He opened it. Veronica stood framed in the harsh light, one hand gripping the strap of her duffel, the other shielding her eyes. Her hair was tied back in a loose braid, and her clothes bore the creased look of someone who had slept in a car, or perhaps not slept at all. Behind her, the generator sputtered to life, then immediately cut out again, stalling with a cough of smoke. "I told you not to come," Matteo said. "I told you the same," she answered. "Here we are." He stepped aside and let her in. The room was small, barely large enough for the cot and the folding table that served as a desk. A chalkboard had been mounted against one wall, covered in notes and sketches Matteo had half erased in frustration. The air inside smelled faintly of copper and dust. Veronica set down her bag and turned slowly, her eyes scanning the room before settling on the window, the one that looked out across the ravine. In the distance, the wire glinted faintly. "They rebuilt it," she said, almost to herself. "Down to the last angle, even the light falls the same." "You've seen this set up before?" Matteo asked. "Not like this, but close enough. My uncle worked at a Chilean observatory back in the 80s. He used to bring me old aerial photos from government archives, stuff never meant for public eyes. One of them showed a nearly identical pair of towers outside Tacna. Same proportions, same wire. There was no mention of why they'd been built, only a code name and a series of blacked-out lines. When I asked him about it, he told me to burn the photo." Matteo raised an eyebrow. "And did you?" "I hid it under a floorboard, in my grandmother's house." She paused. "It disappeared anyway." He said nothing. Outside, the wind pushed dust in uneven spirals against the window pane. "There's more," she said. "My grandmother, on my mother's side, used to tell stories about a sect of performers called Los Caídos del Viento. It translates loosely to those fallen from the wind. She said they were acrobats, tightrope artists, high walkers, but also something more. They weren't entertainers. Not exactly. They were channels, ritualists. Every walk was part of something larger." Matteo turned away from the window and sat on the edge of the cot. "You think this is a ritual?" "I think it's always been one." She retrieved a tablet from her bag, powered it on, and handed it to him. The screen displayed a scanned copy of an old map, faded parchment inked in a mix of Spanish and what appeared to be Quechua. The illustration depicted a range of Andean peaks connected by intersecting lines and spirals, most of which converged near the central canyon. There are ceremonial pathways carved into the ground in this region, Veronica explained. They look like nothing more than walking paths at first glance, but their geometry is precise, constructed according to star patterns. My grandmother said they used to walk these routes during eclipses, or when the constellations aligned, in certain ways. Some say they were trying to speak with the gods. Others think they were guarding against something from beyond. Mateo studied the map, then glanced toward the bunkhouse chalkboard. He stood, retrieved a ruler and compass, and began connecting points on the wire rig's layout he had previously sketched. It wasn't precise, just a quick attempt at orientation, but the pattern that emerged sent a cold tremor through his chest. The towers formed one side of an incomplete geometric diagram, a sigil or mandala of sorts, mirroring ceremonial burial, maps he had once seen in a museum display on Incan necropoli. When he added in the placement of the outbuildings and antenna towers, the pattern grew clearer. A 7-pointed star, intersected by concentric circles. What does it mean? He asked quietly. Veronica shook her head. I don't know. But I've seen versions of that same diagram in places you wouldn't expect. European alchemical texts, 15th century cosmograms, even satellite calibration layouts used by the early SETI programs. Different cultures, different times. Same design. Mateo stepped back and stared at the chalkboard. Maybe it isn't just about walking, he said. Maybe it's about completing the shape, or unlocking something inside it. They worked in silence for an hour, comparing notes, sketching overlay maps, and debating symbolic interpretations. Mateo wanted to believe it was all coincidence. Humans, assigning meaning to patterns, grasping for structure in a world already fraying at the seams. But deep down, he had known from the beginning that the wire was more than performance. It had always been more. At sunset, he agreed to do a walk. Not the full crossing, not yet. Just a test on the main line. A slow advance out from the south tower with the balancing pole in full gear. He would step out a dozen meters, pause, and return. Veronica stood on the platform, arms folded, as he adjusted his harness. Her face was tight, the corners of her mouth drawn down. When he turned to face her, she nodded silently, and he nodded back. Mateo stepped onto the platform, lowered his foot to the wire, and tested its tension. It held. He shifted his weight, adjusted the pole, and began to walk. Step by step, the world behind him dropped away. The canyon fell into shadow beneath his feet, and the towers behind him receded into peripheral haze. The wire sang beneath his boots, a faint vibration rising into his bones. He reached the midway point of his short walk and paused. Then he did something foolish. He let go of the pole. He didn't plan it. He simply opened his hands and allowed the metal to fall. It should have tumbled into the canyon. It should have clanged once against the cliff, bounced and vanished. Instead, it disappeared. Not fell, vanished. There was no sound or impact, and no dust. It was simply gone, as if swallowed by the void. Mateo stood there a moment longer, then turned and walked back to the platform. Veronica met him at the edge. "You dropped it," she said. "I did. And?" It never landed. They both looked out at the wire together, and neither of them spoke again until morning. Dawn arrived without brilliance. The sky brightened in slow increments, its hues washed out and clinical. When the sun finally crested the ridge, it cast a sterile light that drained color from the canyon, rather than illuminating it. The landscape no longer shimmered. Mateo had risen early. He hadn't slept. From his perch atop the South Tower scaffold, he watched the arrival of the broadcast crew. They came in 2 matte black trucks that descended the ridge with unnerving quiet. The men and women who stepped out wore matching utility gear. their movements coordinated but impersonal. They unpacked drone rigs and calibration instruments without discussion, stringing cables between antennae whose origin Matteo could not identify. No insignias adorned their vehicles. No logos marked their crates. Veronica stood several meters. Behind him, her arms crossed. She had observed the preparations in silence until one of the technicians passed within arm's reach without acknowledging her presence. "They don't have names," she said. "No ID tags, no company markings, none of their equipment matches. If this is being broadcast, no one will admit to funding it." Matteo nodded without turning. From here, he could see the wire in full, stretching across the ravine. It no longer shimmered in the heat or bent the light, and now appeared fixed. As the crews prepared below, he continued his warm-up in silence. The movements felt hollow. Repetition had become meaningless. There was no sense of progression, only continuation. 7 a.m., a single tone issued from a mounted speaker. It rose in pitch for exactly 3 seconds before cutting out. A technician raised one hand and announced without emotion, 2 minutes to live feed. The voice was flat and artificial. It had no accent or inflection, and Matteo could not tell whether it had been spoken aloud or transmitted through a device. Veronica approached, placing one hand lightly on his shoulder. "You still don't have to do this." He met her eyes. "I'm not here to finish a performance, I'm here to break one." She didn't respond. Her hand dropped to her side, and she stepped back as he ascended the starting platform. Badimo. Scaffolding had been reinforced since the test walk. Additional grip tape lined the rails. Cameras mounted on gimbals followed his movement, but none made a sound. No crew directed the shots. No one counted down. He stepped onto the platform, adjusted his gloves, and scanned the wire. Its surface was taut, unblemished, and free of any visible point of origin. The north tower mirrored its counterpart, though at this distance the stone around it seemed less real. A voice repeated, "Live feed active." Then everything fell silent. Below him, the audience remained in place, their heads tilted upward, arms mid-motion. Their expressions had frozen. One woman's hands were poised together, fingers millimeters apart, as if waiting to clap. No one blinked. No one shifted. Matteo stepped forward. The first placement of his foot on the wire felt familiar. The movement, coming from a place buried beneath practice and memory. The second step followed with the same certainty. The third resolved into a rhythm. He adjusted the pole across his shoulders and continued, each footfall landing with intention, no longer perceiving time and space. And the wire beneath him held without complaint. When he reached the halfway point, he saw it. At the far end of the wire, a figure emerged. At first, he mistook it for his own shadow stretched forward by the rising sun. Then the silhouette stepped forward, and the illusion fell apart. The figure matched his height and build exactly. Its gait mirrored his, with impossible precision. Its arms extended with the same span, its hands gripped a pole that reflected no light. The clothing matched his own, down to the seams and creases. At the level of detail, however, the imitation failed. Its posture lacked the minor imperfections of a living body. The sway of its hips came a fraction too late. The bend of the knees followed without causality. The figure moved as if reenacting something already completed. Matteo stopped. The figure continued forward by 2 steps before halting in place. He shifted his weight to the left. The figure mirrored him, but not instantly. He raised his hand, and the figure responded. This time its movement came first. He resumed walking, altering his pace. He shortened 1 step and extended the next. He began to move with irregular timing, inserting pauses and changing rhythm. The figure adjusted, then began to anticipate. Each time he tried to disrupt his routine, the figure predicted his next move. When he leaned into his left foot, the figure had already mirrored the correction. When he raised the pole slightly above shoulder height, it had already moved to match the adjustment before his arms had fully lifted. The world began to distort. At first it was subtle. The edges of the canyon bowed inward, creating the impression of concavity. The horizon tilted to the right, clouds elongated into uneven threads. The North Tower extended vertically for several meters, and then snapped, back into place as if caught in a loop. The figure resumed its walk. Mateo remained still. The audience below remained frozen. The space around the wire had been excised from the flow of time, or perhaps redirected. He could no longer tell whether the wire suspended him above the canyon or suspended the canyon beneath him. The figure advanced. Its face had become visible, in full. It was his face, down to the scar near the jawline he had received at 16, when a misjudged dismount had introduced him to the edge of a steel support. But something in the symmetry had failed. The eyes did not track movement. They stared forward without recognition. The smile at the corner of the mouth held too long. Its arms adjusted the pole with an efficiency suggesting automation. The illusion of humanity collapsed. This was not a performer, or even an imitator. It was a recording. It walked toward him as if guided by instructions he had unknowingly authored years earlier, and there was no stopping it. The figure advanced with the certainty of someone retracing their own steps. Every aspect of its movement had been shaped in his image, but distorted in subtle, disturbing ways. Mateo had expected a confrontation, perhaps even a collapse of reality, but he had not anticipated the experience of watching himself rendered hollow. It stood before him now at the center of the span, no more than a few meters away. The illusion of humanity held only at a glance. Upon closer inspection, the facade fell apart. The eyes were shaped like his, but they reflected no ambient light and never shifted focus. The mouth remained slightly open, and the corners had split just past the natural range of motion, giving it the expression of a man mid-laugh who had forgotten how to stop. The symmetry of the face had been preserved, but only externally. No internal thought moved behind it. The arms adjusted the balancing pole with a familiarity that made Mateo's throat tighten. The motion was too smooth, and the limbs extended, at angles that suggested more joints than should have existed in a human body. When it blinked, the eyelids dragged across the sockets a fraction too slowly, as if the memory of the action had degraded and was now being forced through a corrupted playback. Mateo did not speak, nor did he shift his stance. Instead, he observed. The figure mirrored a familiar sequence from one of his earliest televised performances. The same shallow tilt of the torso, the exact positioning of the feet. He recognized it immediately. That walk had aired live in Sao Paulo, and the routine had been his father's invention, preserved and passed down as a kind of homage. Watching the figure perform it now felt less like a tribute and more like a theft. Then it changed. The figure began a routine Mateo had not performed publicly. It pivoted its shoulders into a 3-count sway and planted its weight into a heel turn that Mateo had only ever attempted once, during a private rehearsal with his father in a training facility outside Naples. No audience had been present. No cameras had recorded it. Yet here it was, recreated with mechanical accuracy. Mateo narrowed his eyes in recognition. This was not mimicry in the conventional sense. The figure was not observing and copying, but repeating. Somewhere beneath the fabric of the ritual, beneath whatever force had constructed this encounter, a record had been kept. The figure on the wire had not assembled itself by watching Mateo, but by absorbing the residue of his past. It was reanimating his choices, not just the ones made in public, but those he had long believed forgotten. He raised the balancing pole in contemplation. It rested across his palms, a familiar weight that had once steadied him in hundreds of performances across dozens of countries. He remembered when it had felt like a partner, an extension of his intent, a fulcrum between fear and precision. Now it felt like a relic from someone else's life. He opened his hands, and the pole fell. Instead of tumbling into the depths of the canyon, it hovered in midair momentarily, motionless, before drifting sideways, slowly and without resistance, until it disappeared into a crease in the air itself. All the while, the figure remained motionless. In its arms, it held a replica of the same pole, but the ends had begun to blur. Mateo, of all people, knew the discipline the wire demanded. The structure around it, the ritual, the audience. the uncanny mirror, had all been designed to feed on repetition. The walk was a reenactment of past forms, not an act of creation. Mateo understood now that the only way to end the madness was to deny it. He shifted his weight deliberately, but he chose to place his foot too far forward. The movement lacked refinement. He recovered his balance, but not gracefully. His hips overcompensated and his shoulders swayed inconsistently. The figure across from him twitched. Its reaction came delayed by a beat, then two. Its shoulders adjusted, but the correction lacked precision. The pole it held bent slightly at the center, as though its form no longer registered with certainty. Mateo lifted one foot and positioned it over the cable for a full 3 seconds, holding an unsteady posture that any professional would have immediately corrected. Then he placed the foot down with a shuffle, his heel landing before the ball. The figure stuttered. Its left arm snapped upward, then corrected. The eyes rotated independently of the head, realigning after half a second. Its mouth twitched wider. The corners cracked. Mateo began to walk again, but this time he introduced errors with intention. He rotated his upper body before his lower half followed. He blinked in an erratic rhythm. He muttered a half-remembered lyric from a childhood song in the wrong key. With each imperfection, the figure's coordination degraded further. Its body attempted to follow, but the gestures no longer aligned. The pole shifted from a straight line into a jagged arc, and its feet pressed down with no visible reaction from the wire. The space beneath it had started to ripple, and the tower behind it pulsed faintly. Mateo reached for the tether clipped to his harness. His fingers unfastened the latch without hesitation. He did not intend to fall. That was not the point. The point was to break the seal that had been written into the performance. The figure lunged. However, its movement lacked structure. It propelled forward as if the idea of proximity were more important than physics. Its arms extended too far, and the pole it held cracked open lengthwise, separating into interlocking strands that unraveled as they moved. Mateo did not brace for impact, or attempt to dodge or resist. Instead, he stepped forward and raised his arms. When the figure collided with him, the wire did not bend. There was no recoil, no displacement. The two bodies overlapped, their forms meeting without violence, folding into one another in a manner that defied material comprehension. There was no flash and no sound, only a collapse. The figure's gestures, routines, tics, all the rehearsed fragments of his history, dissolved as if returning to their source. The sensation was strange, like that of a memory being returned to storage. For a moment, everything went still. Then high above the canyon, where two figures had stood moments earlier, there remained only one faint disturbance in the air. It rippled once, and then contracted, leaving the wire perfectly still. Across the ravine, the audience had remained, motionless. The hands that had nearly clapped remained suspended. The towers stood as they had before, and the wire held its form, but the note it emitted, faint, continuous, and almost inaudible, had changed. Mateo awoke on bare stone, face turned toward a sky that had shifted in hue. The sun hovered behind cloud cover, muted and distant as though filtered through layers of mist or memory. His limbs ached in a way that felt structural rather than muscular, as if the process of re-entering his own body had introduced strain to the architecture of his bones. He did not move at first. The texture of the rock beneath him felt unnaturally smooth, wind-polished but without grit. The wire was no longer beneath his feet. The harness, the gloves, the tether, all were gone. His clothes were unchanged, but something within him had been reconfigured, and he could not yet identify what had been removed. The sound that brought him back to himself was that of a breath, shallow, measured, and close. He turned his head and found Veronica seated beside him. Her posture had collapsed inward, and her clothes were coated in red dust. Her eyes, though open, held the emptiness of someone who had watched a process unfold that she did not understand, but could no longer
Deny, you're back, she said.
He noticed that her voice and cadence had changed. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but hesitated. "You walked for 7 days," she said. You never stopped. Not once. Matteo blinked. The sensation was unfamiliar, as if eyelids had only just been reassigned to his face. I don't remember any of it, she nodded without surprise. You started walking before the sun had fully risen. You reached the midpoint and something changed. The rest wasn't walking, it was... Her voice faltered. It was continuous. No breaks, water or food. You didn't respond to anyone. You didn't fall. But you didn't perform either. He sat up slowly. His back cracked at the base of his spine, and the pop echoed across the ledge louder than it should have. The towers still stood. The wire still stretched between them, but it no longer shimmered. Whatever had animated its impossible tension seemed to have dissipated. It sagged now, only slightly, but enough to notice. She followed his gaze. It changed after you stopped, or maybe it stopped after you changed. I'm not sure anymore. He touched the ground with his fingertips. The stone no longer hummed. The silence around them was natural again, filled with the occasional whisper of wind and the distant thrum of insects. The compound had emptied. No technicians remained. No trucks, no antennas, no cameras. How long was I gone? He asked. Veronica closed her eyes. 7 days here. But I don't know what that means anymore. He rose to his feet. The movement was smoother than expected. Whatever damage his body should have sustained had not manifested. He felt intact, but dislocated, as if the boundaries between his awareness and his surroundings had thinned. She rose, as well. You merged with it. Matteo tilted his head. The thing, she said. The figure. I saw it. Just once from the southern tower. I watched it reach you. Then you were both gone. He breathed in, testing the air for scent, but detected only dust and heat. It wasn't trying to replace me. It was trying to complete me. Veronica's eyes flicked toward the sagging wire. Or complete the ritual. They walked in silence, along the edge of the cliff back toward the trail that led to the lower camp. The camp had been stripped of structure. Even the portable bunkhouse had collapsed as though folded into itself. Only a few metal pegs and a torn sheet of weatherproof plastic remained, fluttering weakly. They reached the transport jeep. It sat, with its doors open, keys still in the ignition. Matteo climbed into the passenger side without speaking. Veronica took the wheel, though her hands trembled when she gripped it. The vehicle started without protest, and they drove away from the canyon without looking back. Months passed. A city skyline emerged against a colorless dusk. The glass towers reflected lights not yet lit, and cranes rotated in slow arcs across rooftops that had no clear architectural history. Near the heart of the business district, 2 newly erected towers stood in defiance of zoning laws, constructed faster than materials should have allowed. Between them, a wire stretched across the sky. It was thinner than standard rigging and anchored without visible mounts. No official press release had acknowledged its presence. No permits had been filed and no show had been scheduled. At street level, a child stood beside a vendor cart, clutching a paper cone filled with roasted nuts. He looked upward, his eyes narrowed against the descending twilight. A figure had begun walking the wire. It moved effortlessly with its body parallel to the line, its hands splayed outward, its spine arched in a curve too symmetrical to be maintained by muscle alone. The boy blinked and tugged at his mother's sleeve, but when she turned, the figure had already passed behind the neighboring structure. Inside a nearby office building, Matteo stood beside a window. He wore a dark blazer, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar. His face had aged, though not in the way most would recognize. The years had not creased his skin or dimmed his eyes, but rather hollowed something beneath the surface. He held a glass in one hand, untouched. The television mounted above the office desk remained muted. Headlines scrolled without context. He watched the sky. Behind him, the elevator chimed. He didn't bother to turn. Instead, he muttered to himself, his voice almost too quiet to carry. It's not me this time, but it still knows my name.
Before we descend into the next terrifying tale, don't forget to subscribe to Creep Bedtime, where true horror stories and real creepy encounters come to life in the dead of night. Like this video if you dare to hear more, and drop a comment below. Where in the world are you listening from? Is the darkness of your room making your eyelids heavy, or are you too scared to sleep? Let's see who's brave enough to stay awake for what's next.
The town between. The hum of tires on pavement and the occasional rhythmic slap of seams in the asphalt filled the cabin of the car. It was just after midnight, and Graham Holt kept his eyes fixed on the empty stretch of highway ahead, illuminated by the high beams cutting through the Alabama dark. His wife Kristen had been asleep in the passenger seat for over an hour, her cheek pressed against the window, her breath fogging the glass. Graham didn't mind the solitude. He liked driving at night, especially on long trips like this. The roads thinned out. The distractions faded and the monotony gave him time to think. He tapped a finger absent-mindedly on the steering wheel in time with the music. An old rock playlist he'd built for road trips just like this one. They were somewhere southeast of Montgomery now, cutting through one of those long rural corridors, where nothing seemed to exist except road, trees, and the occasional worn billboard for fireworks or antique stores that might not even be in business anymore. He had checked the GPS not 10 minutes earlier and saw nothing noteworthy for miles. The road was just a line between pinpoints, and the only light besides his headlights came from the waxing moon. He was just beginning to zone out again when something unusual caught his attention in the distance. A faint amber glow rose above, the tree line ahead. It wasn't the stark white of headlights or the dull orange of a street lamp. It was warmer than that, more diffuse. For a moment, he thought it might be a truck stop, maybe a diner or a 24-hour gas station. But as the car crested a low hill and the trees thinned, he saw that it wasn't just a single building. It was a town. A modest main street stretched out to the right of the road, lined with tidy little businesses. Neon signs flickered in pink and blue. Windows glowed with soft yellow light. A drugstore sat on one corner, its storefront trimmed, with retro tile and a well-lit soda fountain visible through the window. Across from it, a barber shop with red and white poles spun slowly in the breeze. All of it looked clean, polished, and inexplicably untouched by time. Graham slowed the car slightly, squinting through the windshield. There were people, too. A couple strolled along the sidewalk, their pace unhurried, the man tipping his hat to someone across the street. A group of teenagers, maybe 6 or 7, stood outside a movie theater, its marquee announcing a double feature of Rebel Without a Cause and House on Haunted Hill. They laughed at something Graham couldn't hear, their voices muffled by the glass. He reached for the volume dial on the stereo, turning it down to better take in the sight. Beside him, Kristen stirred and sat up, rubbing her eyes. "Are we stopping?" she asked, her voice thick with sleep. "No," Graham said, keeping his eyes on the town. "But you're gonna want to look at this." Kristen blinked and leaned forward. "What the hell?" "I know," Graham said. The car rolled past the edge of town and Kristen twisted in her seat to keep watching. "What is this place? Did we miss a sign?" "I didn't see one," he said. "And it wasn't on the GPS. Look at the storefronts. This place looks like a movie set." Kristen frowned, still peering out the window. Could be one of those planned communities. You know, like themed neighborhoods for retirees. They do that kind of retro vibe sometimes. "Maybe," Graham said. "But at 1 in the morning?" Kristen didn't answer. The road curved gently as they exited the far side of town. The lights faded behind them, swallowed again by the woods and darkness. Graham glanced in the rearview mirror, but the glow was already gone. The GPS flickered briefly and then corrected itself. A blue arrow continued east. No mention of a town, no street names. Just a road, as empty and featureless as it had been for hours. They reached Florida without incident the next day. A week later, they retraced the same route on the drive home. The sun was lower in the sky this time, casting long shadows across the fields and the tree-lined highway. Kristen, wide awake and flipping through a playlist, kept an eye out for the little town, now curious to see it again in daylight. "You sure it was around here?" she asked. Graham nodded. "It had to be. I remember the hill and that billboard for boiled peanuts. Should be just ahead." They passed the hill, the trees, and the stretch of shoulder where the entrance had been, but what they saw this time was not the same town. Or rather it was, but only in the barest sense. The buildings still lined the roadside, but the windows were broken, their glass panes missing or smeared with soot. Signs hung askew, paint peeled in curling strips. The movie theater's marquee had collapsed, the letters strewn across the sidewalk like fallen teeth. The barbershop pole was gone entirely, and the drugstore's awning had caved in. Grass and vines had overtaken the sidewalks, sprouting from cracks in the pavement. A tree had grown up through the roof of what might once have been a diner. Rusted truck, its tires flat and windshield shattered, sat abandoned in the middle of the street. Kristen leaned forward. "No way." Graham slowed the car again, staring. "That's the same town, it has to be. Same layout, same buildings. But this looks like it's been abandoned for decades." Kristen shook her head. "We must have gotten turned around. Maybe it's a different town that just looks similar. There's no way. I remember that gas station on the corner. It had the same paint job, that same big Coke ad painted on the side. But now look at it. The ad was faded to the point of illegibility, its colors leached to ghostly pastel. The gas pumps were missing. Kristen's face was pale. This place can't have decayed like that in a week." "No," Graham said. "It can't." He drove on, and neither of them spoke for several minutes. When the GPS offered them an alternate route further north, they took it without hesitation. They didn't talk about the town again until weeks later, and even then, it was brief. Kristen insisted there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe there had been two towns, or maybe they had misremembered the route. Graham never believed that. He didn't say much about it, but the memory stuck with him, sharper than most. He didn't tell Kristen that sometimes late at night, he thought about the town, not just what they'd seen, but what they hadn't. Something about it had felt incomplete, like they'd only seen one side of something much larger. He told himself it didn't matter. It was in the past, but he never forgot. The sun hung high over a stretch of two-lane blacktop that wound its way through southeastern Alabama. The sky was bright and cloudless, and the day had that familiar southern heaviness that settled in the bones and refused to lift until long after sunset. Graham Holt adjusted his grip on the steering wheel and glanced at the GPS display mounted on the dashboard. The route guidance had failed 10 minutes ago, freezing for several seconds before rebooting entirely. They were supposed to be detouring around a highway closure near Evergreen, but nothing about the road they were currently on matched the alternate route directions Kristen had written down before they left. "Anything yet?" he asked, nodding toward her phone. Kristen frowned and shook her head, thumbing at the screen. "It keeps saying we're off course, but the map won't redraw. I think we've lost signal." Graham looked ahead and noticed the landscape had changed while they weren't paying attention. The pines had grown taller and thicker, pressing in on both sides. The road had narrowed slightly, and the few scattered homes and businesses they had seen an hour ago had given way to long stretches of nothing. Kristen shifted in her seat and opened the glove compartment, pulling out the folded road atlas they kept as a backup. "Want me to check the county roads?" "Sure," Graham said, though a dull ache had already begun to form in his chest. There was something familiar about the terrain now, the way the trees leaned in, the slight curvature of the road, the infrequent weathered telephone poles that lined the ditch. He gripped the wheel tightly and tried to ignore the growing certainty that he had been on this road before. Kristen traced a finger along one of the smaller highways and then paused. "If this is County Route 93, we're heading northeast. That's the way we wanted to go, but we're definitely not where we're supposed to be. None of this matches what I mapped out." Graham didn't respond immediately. His eyes were locked on the road ahead, A low hill was beginning to rise in the distance, the same kind they'd passed on that strange trip years ago. He recognized the slope, the gradual curve of it, and the broken remains of a billboard just beyond it. "Kristen," he said, his voice quieter now, "I think we're close." She looked up from the map. "Close to what?" He didn't answer. As they crested the hill, the trees parted slightly, and the town revealed itself like a memory being summoned back to life. It appeared, exactly as it had the first time, clean, bright, impossibly preserved. The storefronts were intact, the glass gleamed in the sunlight, and the same vintage signage flickered with soft neon. A bakery, a soda fountain, a clothing store with mannequins in mid-century dresses all stood as though they had been waiting for someone to return. Kristen leaned forward. "No way." Graham slowed the car, his hands rigid on the wheel. The people were there too. A man in a bow tie swept the sidewalk outside a barber shop. A pair of teenage boys tossed a baseball back and forth in front of the theater, whose marquee once again offered the same double feature. Kristen stared. "I thought this place was abandoned," Graham said. It was. She turned in, her seat, to look at him. "We must have gotten it wrong last time. We thought we were in the same place, but we must not have been." "No," he said firmly, without looking away. "It's the same place, same hill, same billboard, same town." They rolled past the gas station on the corner, and Graham spotted the red and white Coke mural on the side of the building. It was unblemished, with no trace of fading or wear. Kristen turned to look out the rear window. "It doesn't make any sense. You said it looked like it had been falling apart for decades." "It did," he said. They drove another block before. Graham pulled the car into a diagonal parking space outside what appeared to be a general store. The engine ticked quietly as it cooled. For a moment, neither of them moved. "Maybe we should ask someone where we are," Kristen said cautiously. Graham didn't argue. They stepped out of the car, and immediately the warmth of the sun was cut by a strange stillness in the air. The town had a lived-in look, but there was something about the atmosphere that felt staged, like a film set caught between takes. The bell above the door jingled as they entered the gas station. A middle-aged man stood behind the counter, wiping his hands on a rag. He looked up and smiled broadly. "Afternoon passing through?" Graham nodded. "Yeah, got a little turned around. GPS cut out, and now we're just trying to get back on track." The man chuckled. "You're not the first. Happens more often than you'd think." Kristen stepped forward. "What town is this exactly?" The man raised an eyebrow. "This here's Hartfield." "Hartfield?" Graham repeated. "I don't remember seeing that on the map." "We're kind of tucked away," the man said. "Easy to miss if you're not looking." Graham exchanged a glance with Kristen, then turned back to the clerk. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "What year is it?" The man blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Well, it's 2024. He hesitated at the end, the word sounding more like a question than an answer. Kristen's smile faltered. "Right. Okay, thanks." They left, the store in silence. Back outside, Graham checked his phone. No signal. The bars were gone, and the screen displayed only a spinning icon in place of a location. Kristen tried hers with the same result. "I don't like this," she said quietly. Graham nodded and turned to look back down the street. "Let's just get back on the road. Head the way we came in." They returned to the car and pulled out of the parking space. Graham followed the same road they had entered on, but within 2 blocks the scenery changed. Instead of the open stretch leading to the forested highway, the road curved sharply to the right and brought them past the theater again. Kristen frowned. "That's not right, this is where we just were." He kept driving, taking another right, trying to reverse direction. Again they passed the gas station, then the general store. "Try left this time," Kristen said. He did. The road wound past a playground and a municipal building before feeding back into the main street. The theater loomed ahead once more. "Graham, I know." He tried again. making a series of left turns this time, attempting to find a pattern or break, free of the loop. But no matter what route they followed, they always returned to the same intersection, the same storefronts, the same people, the same fixed smiles. He gripped the wheel harder. "We're not getting out." "We're trapped," Kristen replied. Graham pulled the car to the curb and shut off the engine. For several seconds, neither of them said anything. The distance. The faint sound of a song played from some unseen radio. Something old, upbeat, and distorted, like it was being broadcast from a place that hadn't existed in decades. And from somewhere deeper in the town, behind brick walls and closed doors, the rhythm of footsteps echoed across the pavement like a metronome ticking down time neither of them could track. They spent nearly 20 minutes driving in circles before accepting what had become undeniably clear. No matter which turn they took or how carefully they tried to retrace their route, the roads kept leading them back to the same few streets, the same businesses, and the same set of townspeople who continued their peculiar routines as though nothing had changed. With each pass, the gas station attendant offered the same smile, the same casual wave. The boys in front of the movie theater tossed their ball with the same lazy arc. The man sweeping outside the barber shop never moved from his square of sidewalk. Graham stopped the car in front of a modest brick building bearing a neon sign that read, "Pine Rest Motel." The sign buzzed faintly in the afternoon heat, casting a red glow against the wall beside it. "We should stay," he said, as Kristen stared out the window beside him. Kristen turned toward him slowly. "Stay here? Just for the night. Maybe we're exhausted. We haven't had anything to eat in hours and the sun's going down soon. We'll regroup. Try again in the morning." She hesitated, clearly uneasy, but after a long pause, she gave a small nod. "All right." They climbed the short concrete steps and pushed open the front door, which triggered a brass bell hanging just above the frame. The lobby was small but clean, with a worn checkerboard floor and a wooden reception desk framed by twin ficus plants. A woman in her 40s stood behind the counter. Her hair was pulled into a tight bun, and her pale yellow uniform dress looked freshly pressed. She smiled as they approached. "Welcome to Pine Rest," she said pleasantly. "You're just in time. We've been expecting you." Graham stopped short. "You've been expecting us?" "Yes, of course." The woman turned the guest book on the counter and gestured to it. "See for yourself." The book was bound in brown leather with a cracked spine. Graham opened it and flipped through the pages. Near the bottom of one entry, written in neat blue ink, he saw their names, Graham and Kristen Holt, scrawled in firm handwriting. The date beside the entry stopped him cold. It read, August 17th, 2019, 4 years ago, nearly to the day. Kristen leaned in and stared. "This has to be a mistake," she said, but her voice was quieter than it had been moments earlier. "I don't think it is," Graham said. He looked up. "Who wrote this?" The woman smiled with practiced ease. "Well, you did. That's your signature, isn't it?" He didn't respond. Their room was on the second floor near the end of the hallway. It was modest, like the lobby, with matching lamps on either side of the bed and a small dresser facing a curtained window. The bedding was clean, though patterned in a dated floral design. Everything looked recently maintained, and yet it all felt subtly out of place, as if they had stepped into a facsimile of a motel rather than the real thing. Kristen paced the room while Graham pulled the curtains open. The street outside looked as it had an hour earlier, empty but lit with late afternoon sunlight. A man walked slowly along the far sidewalk, twirling a coin between his fingers. He did not glance in their direction. "This place isn't right," Kristen said finally. "That guest book, how would they have our names from 4 years ago? And why would we have signed in back then?" "We didn't," Graham replied. "We never stayed here. I'd remember. But that doesn't change the fact that our names are in that book." Kristen crossed her arms. "Maybe someone's playing a trick on us. It could be a setup, a prank, or even what?" She hesitated. "Even something worse." As the evening deepened, Graham began moving through the room, checking the drawers, the closet, the dresser, even under the bed. It was a habit he had picked up from his father, a retired sheriff who had spent decades emphasizing the importance of evidence, of details, of signs most people missed. In the nightstand drawer, Graham found a local newspaper titled The Hartfield Ledger. The front page featured a story about the expansion of a train depot that no longer existed in any of the maps Graham had seen of the region. The date on the paper was October 4th, 1957. Beneath it was another issue, more yellowed than the first. Its headline described a 4th of July parade scheduled for the upcoming summer of 1974. And at the bottom of the stack, nearly brittle with age, was a single sheet with no date at all. It contained only a classified section with items for sale: milk, delivery service, typewriter repair, and radio vacuum tubes. He spread the papers across the desk and stared at them for a long time. Kristen joined him and skimmed the headlines. "These don't make sense," she said. "They're not even from the same decade." "No," Graham agreed. "Some of them might not even be real." When night fell, Kristen double-checked that the room's deadbolt was secured and that the curtains were tightly drawn. The street had grown unnervingly quiet. No cars passed. No voices echoed from the sidewalk. At 11:42 p.m., Kristen sat upright in bed. Graham had just begun to drift off when her sudden movement startled him awake. "Did you hear that?" she asked. He rubbed his eyes. "Hear what?" "A sound, just outside the window." They both fell still. Then it came again, a slow, steady rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. Graham sat up and turned toward the window, but the curtain did not stir, and the sound stopped just as abruptly as it had begun. He moved to the window and pulled the curtain aside slightly. The sidewalk was empty. The street beyond it was still. Kristen stood beside him. "There's no one there." "No," he said, but someone was. Neither of them slept much that night. By morning, the town appeared unchanged. The people resumed their routines with eerie precision, like wind-up toys on a schedule. Graham, determined to find an answer, left the motel after breakfast and began walking the streets, watching for anything that might break the illusion. Kristen stayed behind, unsettled by the previous night's tapping and still unconvinced they were safe outside. The newspaper office was just down the block, nestled between the barber shop and a modest bakery. Inside, the reception area was vacant, the front desk empty. A small bell sat atop the counter and Graham tapped it once. A door behind the desk creaked open, and a man stepped out, a familiar figure in a brown suit, his fedora tipped at a slight angle. He was clean-shaven, neatly dressed, and looked exactly as he had on that first trip 4 years earlier. The man smiled warmly. "You made it back," he said. Graham was speechless. The man didn't seem surprised to see him. In fact, he behaved as though this was a long-anticipated reunion. "I saw you once before," Graham said cautiously. "You were standing outside the theater 4 years ago." The man nodded. "Yes, you noticed even then. Not everyone does." "What is this place?" Graham asked. "Why are we here?" "You tell me," the man said, and he gestured toward the door without offering further explanation. Graham left the building without another word. That night, the town began to change. It started subtly. The lights along the main street dimmed earlier than they had the previous evening. The neon signs buzzed louder, some of them flickering more rapidly or shutting off entirely. Kristen watched through the window as the bakery across the street vanished, its warm interior lights extinguished in a blink, replaced by boarded windows and crumbling stone. "Graham," she whispered. He looked up and joined her at the glass. The theater now stood in ruin, its marquee barely hanging on, just as it had appeared 4 years earlier on their return trip. The same pieces of fallen lettering lay strewn across the sidewalk, and then just as quickly the decay reversed. The marquee reassembled itself in the blink of an eye. The signs brightened. The shop windows glowed once more. "What the hell is going on?" Kristen murmured. Graham didn't answer immediately. He was watching the people, only now they weren't moving at all. They stood motionless in doorways behind glass, near benches and storefronts. All of them stared toward the motel, toward the window, toward them. "I think they know we're not supposed to be here," Graham said quietly. Kristen shivered. "Or maybe we are." The next morning arrived with an unnatural silence. The birdsong Graham had heard faintly the morning before had vanished. Even the air outside the motel room felt stagnant, as if held in suspension, waiting for something to break it loose. He stood at the edge of the parking lot with a paper cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The street was there, identical to the day before. But the people seemed less animated, as if each of them was simply occupying a place rather than living a moment. He watched the man in front of the barber shop sweep the sidewalk with the same exact strokes, the same rhythm he had seen yesterday and the day before that. The boy in the red windbreaker outside the theater bounced the same ball off the same square of pavement. The routine had become too perfect, too rehearsed. It no longer seemed like repetition born of habit, but rather the malfunction of a system, struggling to simulate life. Kristen joined him on the motel steps, arms crossed tightly against her chest. She had slept even less than he had, and her eyes were rimmed with red. "This place isn't changing," she said. Graham shook his head. "No, but I think we are." She looked at him. "Think about it," he said. "The papers in the nightstand, different decades, the people repeating themselves, the town flipping between whole and ruined. I don't think this place exists in just one time. I think we're inside something fractured, something that's trying to hold itself together by pretending nothing's wrong." Kristen turned her eyes back toward the street. "Then what does it want with us?" Graham hesitated. "It wants to remember, and it's using us to do it." The sky had darkened by late afternoon, colors themselves dimming with the passage of time. The hues of buildings, cars, and trees had all begun to mute. The whites of the window frames became gray. The yellow of the soda shop's awning faded to beige. It was as if the entire town was being drained of its saturation. They were walking back from the diner, one of the few buildings still operating, when Kristen slowed beside him. "Do you hear that?" she asked. Graham paused. From somewhere in the distance, behind the theater or maybe beyond it, came the low thrum of bass, a muffled echo of live music. The tone was warm and slow, suggestive of a blues progression being played far too late at night. Kristen's expression shifted. "That doesn't make sense." "No," Graham said. "It doesn't." They rounded the corner and passed an alleyway that had not been there earlier. At the end was a door with a frosted pane and a hanging sign above it that read, "The Side Pocket Lounge." A faint red light glowed behind the glass. The music grew louder the closer they approached. "I don't remember seeing this before," Kristen said. Graham took a step toward the door. "I need to see." "I'm coming with you." He shook his head. "No, just stay here. I'll be right back." She hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. He pushed the door open. Inside, the bar was bathed in a warm amber glow. The walls were lined with old framed photographs, and dust motes floated in the still air. A stage stood at the far end of the room, lit by a series of dim spotlights, and on that stage was a four-piece band playing something slow and haunting. The bass player wore a weathered leather jacket and tapped his heel in time. The guitarist kept his head low, fingers working the frets. The keyboardist leaned into his instrument with a far-off look in his eyes. But it was the drummer who held Graham in place. He was looking at himself. Not a stranger who looked vaguely. Similar, but an exact copy. His own face, his own posture, his own nervous energy channeled into every downbeat. The man on stage didn't look at him, but the rest of the band did. Their eyes locked onto him like they'd been waiting for him to arrive. The song continued, but now it seemed less like a performance and more like a ritual. Something was being summoned, or remembered, or rebuilt through rhythm and motion. Graham stepped back, nearly knocking over a bar stool, turned and hurried through the door. Kristen was gone. The alley was empty. He shouted her name once, then again, until at last he began to panic. He ran down the alley, then back to the main road. No sign of her. No indication she had ever stood there. The people on the sidewalk remained unchanged. They went about their silent mimicry, offering no acknowledgement of him, no indication that anything had happened at all. Graham ran block to block, scanning windows, alleys, and open doors. He called out for her until his throat grew hoarse, but no one answered, and no one helped. He had nearly given in to despair when, across the street, in a stretch of ruined buildings that had not existed minutes earlier, he saw movement behind a jagged window. It was her. Kristen stood in the dark interior of what might once have been a department store, her hands pressed against the glass. Her mouth moved, but no sound reached him. The window itself looked thick with grime. Its surface buckled and fractured, and the building around it seemed to teeter on the edge of collapse. Graham darted across the street and climbed over a pile of broken bricks to reach the front door, which hung askew on rusted hinges. The inside of the building was even worse than it had appeared. The floorboards sagged beneath his weight, and the air smelled of rot and mildew. But Kristen was still there, visible through the cracked frame of the window, her expression panicked and pleading. He crossed the room and found the staircase half buried under rubble. He climbed carefully, avoiding the soft spots in the boards until he reached the upper floor. The hallway was warped and slanted, its walls peeling in sheets. But there was a door ajar at the far end. A sliver of flickering light behind it. He pushed it open. Kristen turned toward him from where she stood by the window. "You found me," she whispered, her voice faint but intact. "I never stopped looking." Suddenly, the floor quaked beneath them, and a deep groan rolled through the structure. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and the walls trembled with a sudden, violent energy. "We have to go," Graham said. He took her hand, and together they ran back through the hallway as the boards cracked behind them. The stairwell trembled, underfoot and outside. The world seemed to strobe violently, shifting between the pristine town and its decayed counterpart with every few steps. One second, they were running through fresh pavement and clear skies. The next, through cracked streets and a sky the color of ash. They reached the street and sprinted past storefronts that morphed as they passed them. One blink and the bakery returned. Another, and it vanished again. Every window was now filled with faces, watching, unmoving, their eyes fixed forward, unblinking. As they crossed the last intersection, the street fell away behind them. Buildings collapsed in bursts. Of noise and dust, the streetlights winked out and the ground rippled. Then, without warning, it was gone. The next thing they knew, they were standing on the shoulder of a normal country road, a row of long weeds at their feet, and pine trees stretching ahead in either direction. No buildings, no signs, no town. Behind them, the sun began to dip toward the horizon. The road was quiet again, and there was no trace of Hartfield, only a long stretch of highway leading away from the place they should never have found. The drive home was uneventful. It should have been comforting, the way the familiar terrain returned. Highway signs, gas stations, cell reception, and the dull glow of strip malls along the outskirts of cities. But for Graham Holt, the normalcy felt foreign. Kristen sat quietly in the passenger seat, her head turned toward the window, though her reflection in the glass revealed that her eyes were closed. She had barely spoken since they crossed the invisible line that had freed them. He hadn't pressed her, and she hadn't volunteered anything. When they arrived back in their neighborhood, everything looked the same. The hedges were trimmed. The neighbors' porch lights clicked on with programmed precision. The air smelled of grass clippings and grill smoke. And yet, even in the light of the mundane, the memory of Hartfield clung to them. That night, Graham lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, Kristen lying beside him while the rhythmic hum of the ceiling fan traced lazy circles across the room. He didn't sleep. By morning, Kristen had returned to her routines, but something fundamental had shifted. She moved through her day with practiced normalcy, pouring coffee, checking work emails, folding laundry, but avoided any mention of the trip. When Graham asked if she remembered what had happened, she responded with clipped deflections or silence. The few times he pressed her, she shook her head, once with enough force to spill a half-full mug of tea across the kitchen counter. "I just want to forget it," she told him finally. "If we talk about it, it stays real." So Graham stopped asking, but he didn't forget. He couldn't. Over the following weeks, he began researching everything he could about that region of Alabama. He scoured topographic maps, old highway guides, and archived versions of online directories. He looked for Hartfield in real estate listings, in census records, and in digitized obituaries. Nothing ever came up. It was as if the place had been surgically removed from public record. He reached out to amateur historians and ghost town enthusiasts through message boards and obscure blogs. A few replied, but no one had heard of a preserved mid-century town near Route 93 that blinked in and out of existence. One person responded with a theory about liminal settlements, places that exist between real-world coordinates, but occasionally intersect with our own. The explanation made a certain kind of poetic sense, but offered no proof. No name, no paper trail, and Graham needed something tangible, something provable. He returned to his father's house that fall. The old man had passed 2 years earlier, and the house had been sitting vacant ever since. It still smelled of pipe tobacco and cedar shavings, and the basement, where his father had kept all his case files and archives from his time as sheriff, remained untouched. He went through the metal filing cabinets expecting nothing but police reports and clippings from local papers. He nearly missed it. An unmarked folder tucked into the back of a drawer beneath a box of slide photographs. Inside were a few yellowed sheets of paper, an envelope sealed with tape, and a brittle newspaper clipping folded down the middle. He opened the clipping first. The headline read, "Mysterious Disappearances Along Highway 93. Locals warn don't. Stop for the town." The article had no byline and offered no concrete information, only a brief summary of missing travelers and unverified sightings of a place that shouldn't be there. Locals had refused to comment directly, but a handwritten note in the margin, likely scrawled by his father, read, "Never close the file. Too many blanks. Not enough bodies." There was a grainy photo beneath the headline, barely legible from decades of wear and poor ink transfer. But even through the distortion, Graham recognized it instantly. It was Hartfield, the drugstore, the marquee, the striped barber pole, all there. His hands trembled as he unfolded the envelope. Inside were 2 Polaroids dated August 17th, 1981. The IQ first showed a street corner, identical to the one he had parked beside. The second depicted a man and a woman standing in front of the motel. They were slightly blurred, caught mid-step, as if they hadn't expected to be photographed. The resemblance between the man in the photo and Graham was uncanny. The woman was less distinct, her face half-turned, but something in the posture looked familiar. He checked the back of the photo. There were no names, only a faint pencil marking that read, "Returned 3 days later." No sign of either. That night, Graham didn't tell Kristen what he'd found. She had already gone to bed, and he didn't want to stir the thin thread of stability she was clinging to. But when he finally lay down beside her and closed his eyes, the room was no longer silent. From outside, beyond the hedges and the concrete drive, came a sound so faint he nearly dismissed it as imagination. Tap. 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 He sat up and looked through the window, but there was nothing beyond the glass except darkness and the glint of a passing car's headlights reflected in the distance. Still, he didn't move, because some places, he now knew, aren't meant to be found.
Hey, brave souls. Before we unravel the next spine-chilling story, make sure you're subscribed. Only place for true horror tales and eerie encounters that'll haunt your dreams. Give this video a like if you're ready for more scares. And comment below. Where in the world are you hiding while you listen? Is that sleepy feeling creeping in? Or are my stories keeping you wide awake under the covers? Tell me, I'm dying to know.
The third-floor door. Edsel Klein hadn't seen the inside of a factory in nearly 20 years. The last one he worked for, Metzger sheet metal, shut down in 2003, and the pension it paid out had been devoured over time by a sick wife, a gambling phase he didn't like to dwell on, and the slow decay of old cars and broken appliances that always seemed to cost just a little more than they should. The Holter Foods canning plant, as far as he could tell, had been around even longer than Metzger, though it was holding together just as poorly, if not worse. The exterior was comprised of corrugated siding and moss-veiled brick. The red faded to a liverish brown under decades of sun and mildew. Ed parked his Buick near the loading dock and waited with the engine off and his gloved hands resting on the wheel. He didn't move until the green security light above the rear entrance blinked twice, then held steady. That was the sign to enter. The hallway inside smelled of vinegar and lubricant. Everything was wet with something, condensation or runoff, or rusty leakage that had taken up residence in the floor seams. His boots squeaked no matter how softly he stepped. No one greeted him. That had been the first night, when the man with the clipboard, Delancey, shook his hand in the locker room, gave him a badge that didn't open any doors, and led him past the packing line without saying a word about the others working there. "You're not here for any of that," Delancey had said, gesturing at the mechanized belt that clattered endlessly under gloved hands and rubber aprons. "We've got something special for you." At the time, Ed had figured they saw his age and wanted to keep him off the floor. Maybe they needed a night watch. That was fine. He didn't have much to prove anymore. As long as he stayed on payroll and cleared his credit cards before the interest boiled him alive, he could stand a bit of odd work. But now, as he climbed the narrow service stairs for the third night in a row, he wasn't so sure. The stairwell was steel scaffolding, bolted, to the back of the building like an afterthought. It had no handrail on one side, just a waist-high mesh of chain-link fencing already split in places, as if something heavy had been dragged against it. A yellow security bulb hung above each landing, casting sickly pools of light across the steps in the alley far below. No one used the stairs except him. That was clear from the dust and bird droppings caked near the base, and from the way Delancey had said, "You'll need good shoes," with a little grin. By the time he reached the top landing, third floor, exterior access only, Ed's breath was coming hard. He paused and reached for the small folding stool propped just beside the door, taking a moment to settle in and ease the ache in his knees. Before him loomed the third floor door. It didn't match the building. The door frame had been cut crudely into the side of the old structure, as if someone had knocked out part of a wall and patched it back up with thick slate-gray metal. There was no visible handle, no keycard access, and no window. It didn't even sit flush with the building. A faint seam ringed the frame, a hairline gap that Ed noticed only when the wind blew and whistled faintly through it. In front of him sat a folding TV tray, the top of which held two items: a wide leather-bound book, its edges frayed and curling from age or moisture, and a long machete with a wrapped hilt and a thumb-worn grip. "You'll sit right here," Delancey had said, that first night, "and you'll read from that book every 15 minutes. One page front to back, doesn't matter if you understand it." Ed had opened the book with trembling fingers. The text was comprised of English letters, but they didn't form any words he could recognize. It read like an alphabet gone mad, phonetics strung together in what looked like gibberish but carried a certain rhythm when spoken aloud, unpleasant, but metered. "And the blade?" Ed had asked. Delancey's smile had thinned. "Insurance." No other explanation was given. When Ed tried to ask what the door was, or why it needed guarding, or why the book had to be read on a strict 15-minute cycle, Delancey's tone had hardened. "You want the pay, you do the task. Don't ask questions you aren't ready to hear the answers to. Trust me, Ed. Curiosity's gotten a few better men than you scraped off that landing." So Ed had done the job. Tonight was no different. He checked his watch, 11:58 p.m., and sat upright on the stool. The book lay open to the correct page. He hadn't dared close it since that first night, when Delancey warned him the book sometimes turned to the wrong page on its own. He read the lines aloud. The syllables clung to his tongue like syrup, but he managed. The moment he finished, he scratched the time down in a tiny spiral notebook he kept tucked in his coat. Graham recited, No incidents. His handwriting had become shakier over the past few days. The first night had passed uneventfully, save for the quiet. During that shift, he heard no voices and saw no movement. That night, the silence was interrupted only by the moan of the wind and the occasional clank of the factory's internal operations below. The second night, he thought he heard scratching. Tonight, he was sure. It came at 12:13, a few minutes before the next scheduled recitation. A soft tapping like fingers drumming lightly on wood, except the door was metal and the taps weren't rhythmic. They were testing, searching. He froze, the machete in his lap. The sound stopped the moment he picked it up. He stared at the door for a long while. When the minute hand clicked over to 12:15, he read again. The same page, the same meaningless text. His voice cracked at the third line, but he pushed through it. When he finished, he thought he heard a whisper, just barely perceptible over the breeze that threaded through the scaffold bars. A word, maybe two. Help us. He stood, too quickly, nearly upsetting the tray. There was no one else there. He looked down the stairs, checked the alley and the rooftop line of the building beside Holter Foods. Everywhere he looked was empty. There were no pranksters, no coworkers hiding behind the compressors, only darkness and faint light from the loading dock and the lurching shadow of his own body against the far wall. He sat again and reached for the machete, just to hold it for comfort. 2:16 a.m. heard voice. Help us. Could be wind. Uncertain. He paused before writing the last three words. He felt the pressure to document it honestly, but something about it felt traitorous, as if the act of acknowledging the whisper lent it weight. The wind picked up again, and behind the door something shifted. By the seventh night, the factory seemed to sweat. The upper floors had always been warmer than the rest of the building, something to do with steam lines running through the walls, Ed assumed. But now the air had taken on a wetness that clung to the skin like animal breath. Every surface felt just shy of damp. The folding chair hissed softly when he sat down, and the spine of the book creaked as though it resented being opened. He had begun to notice the smell. It wasn't any single odor, but a composite, old rain trapped in sealed metal, spoiled, syrup left too long in a hot cupboard, something faintly coppery that dried out the roof of his mouth the longer he sat with it. He kept a tin of mints in his coat pocket and found himself reaching for them more often, even though they didn't help much. He'd taken to humming to himself between readings, low and tuneless, not to comfort himself exactly, but to drown out the sounds he pretended he hadn't heard. They were clearer now, less like wind and more like language, though still garbled, like radio signals warped by thunderclouds. Sometimes they came in waves, moaning, choking, the guttural tremble of someone stifling a sob. Other times, they were frighteningly precise. One voice every so often threaded its way through the rest, pressing against the door with familiarity. "Daddy, please." That one nearly broke him. He didn't remember standing up. He found himself halfway across the landing, machete raised without realizing he'd drawn it. His free hand hovering near the seam in the door like he meant to trace it. He sat down again and waited for the next mark on his watch. 4 a.m. recited, no new activity, mild sound. Stayed seated, the lie tasted bitter as he wrote it. Ed hadn't heard from his daughter in over a year. She lived in New York now, or maybe outside it, and the last time they spoke she'd been sharp with him over money, something to do with his handling of the estate after her mother passed. That voice behind the door wasn't hers. Couldn't. But it had her inflection, the lilt at the end of certain phrases, and the same uneven rhythm when she was frightened. The book, still open in his lap, looked wrong. It was turned to the same page he'd been reading from all week, but the shape of the text had changed. The letters were the same as before, angular, jagged, but now they leaned slightly to the left, as if tugged by gravity from a direction Ed didn't understand. The lines had grown narrower, packed tighter. He touched one of the margins and found his fingertip tingled faintly, like a struck tuning fork. He didn't write that down. At 1:45, he stood to begin the next reading. He lifted the book from his lap and brought it to eye level. But as he did, a sharp jolt cracked through the bridge of his nose. He staggered and caught himself on the tray. Blood welled in both nostrils, hot and sudden. It coursed down over his lip and into his mouth before he could fumble a handkerchief free from his coat. His vision blurred. He tried to focus on the letters but found them swimming. The book slipped from his grip. It struck the metal deck with a heavy thwop, pages flaring outward, and came to rest face down. His watch read 1:47. "Shit," he muttered, dabbing his nose with shaking fingers. Blood smeared across his upper lip and down his chin. The pressure behind his eyes was immediate, and when he knelt to retrieve the book, his vision went dark at the edges. He nearly dropped the machete trying to steady himself. He flipped the book open and found the correct page, though the letters seemed even more distorted now. The vertical slashes bled into curves, and the spacing between syllables had collapsed entirely. His voice cracked as he began to read. He lost the cadence halfway through the first line and had to restart. His tongue felt too thick, his throat swollen. He pushed on, tripping over syllables until the final consonant left his mouth in a hoarse rasp that scraped the back of his teeth. When he looked up, he saw them, hairline fractures. They spidered out from the center of the door, no more than 6 or 7, but they were real, and they hadn't been there before. He was sure of it. Ed ran his palm over the surface and felt them catch against his skin, as shallow and sharp as paper cuts. A faint hiss, barely audible, issued from the seams. He backed away, pressing the book flat against his chest. The wind picked up, and a metallic clatter echoed from the alley below. As a result, Ed almost missed the sound of the outer stairwell, totter opening. Delancey emerged into the yellow spill of light, his coat flapping behind him. He looked displeased but not surprised. His eyes scanned Ed's face, the tray, the book in his arms, and finally the cracks in the door. "You skipped on," he said quietly. "No," Ed lied. I just dropped the book is all, kept the time." "You didn't." Delancey stepped forward, lowering his voice as if afraid something might hear. "Don't lie to me. You skipped. Maybe by a minute. Maybe 2. You think it doesn't matter, but that seal isn't symbolic, Ed. It's temporal. You break the rhythm and it starts looking for another pattern. Another way through." Ed felt the blood cooling on his face. "It talked to me." Delancey didn't blink. "Of course it did. That's the only tool it's got." "What is it?" "You already know. I'm not supposed to tell you. It sounded like my daughter." "That's exactly the point." Delancey turned back toward the stairs, pausing only long enough to glance over his shoulder. "You've got 4 more hours on the schedule. Do not drop the book again. And for Christ's sake, stop listening." The manager descended the steps without another word. Ed remained frozen for several minutes, watching the hairline cracks on the door's surface. He imagined they had grown slightly. One of them curved now, bending in a way he didn't remember from before, and he thought he saw a shimmer within the seam, as if light passed through from the other side, though. The gap should have been sealed. He sat down and checked his watch. "I'm late. Book dropped. Crack appeared. Spoke to Delancey. Recovered." He capped the pen and stared at the last word for a long time. Recovered. It didn't feel true. That morning, after clocking out and shuffling to his car beneath a drizzle that hadn't been in the forecast, Ed dreamed, a dream he had never dreamed before. He was standing in an expansive, grassy field. A black sun hung above the horizon, burning downward like a sinkhole in the sky. The door stood upright at the center of the field, unconnected to any wall. Its edges glowed faintly, and the cracks had grown wide enough to reveal slivers of what lay beyond. Through them, he saw stars, writhing, spinning, collapsing and reforming. The door was open. Something had gone through. He awoke with his coat still on, seated upright in the Buick, his time card unpunched and the faint taste of iron on his tongue. The following nights blurred together. Ed began marking the dates on the inside cover of the book, not because he believed he would forget them, but as if recording them might anchor reality in place. The voices, however, didn't fade. They deepened. Where before there had been murmur and pleading, now there were accusations delivered with unsettling familiarity. The voice that had once mimicked his daughter's sobs now used her speaking voice, her pet names, her phrasings. The quiet phrases only a father would remember. Others joined her. His ex-wife's reprimanding tone emerged one evening near 2:30, reminding him of unpaid bills and passive betrayals. There was a man he hadn't spoken to in 40 years, a friend from the welding crew who had overdosed in Ed's trailer during a summer blackout. They all spoke to him now, just inches behind the steel. "You never called her back. You knew about the pills. You flushed the rest, didn't you? You let us die, Ed. You let all of us die." It had taken everything in him not to shout back. He pressed the book to his chest and recited through clenched teeth, his voice steady but pale, thin as a reed in wind. The machete stayed closer, now its black blade resting across his knees. He had started sleeping with it propped beside his mattress back home. He no longer believed the third-floor door's influence ended when he punched out. The seal had worsened. On the 11th night, Ed arrived to find the cracks had multiplied. Dozens now split the surface in feathered lines, branching like veins, toward the edges of the frame. Dull light emanating from within, he approached cautiously, stooping to examine a wide fracture near the bottom. There, barely visible through the gap, he saw movement. It lasted less than a second, a flicker of something inside, like a pale hand dragging down a shower curtain. The shape had fingers, too many fingers, and what might have been an eye, though its placement defied anatomy. The skin looked stretched and semi-transparent, as if whatever was pressing against the interior was made of meat and light fused together. He fell backward onto the landing and nearly kicked the tray off its bolts. No one was around to hear him. Cursed, though, he paused anyway, half expecting Delancey to emerge again from the shadows like some factory wraith. But the stairs remained empty, and the alley below remained still. After one more look at the seam, Ed climbed back into his chair and opened the book. This time the page was different. The heading, if it could be called that, now appeared as a long string of letters with no spacing, each one jagged and low-slung, their tails dragging into the margins. The text beneath had changed subtly in its shape. Where once it had been uniform in size and spacing, the lines, under strain, now warped near the edges. He blinked, closed the book, reopened it, and found the same page. It was not a misprint. The words themselves were shifting. That night, Ed wrote nothing in his log. He feared seeing it all again in ink. Instead, he turned to the machete, examining its edge as he waited for the next quarter-hour mark. The blade should have dulled by now. It had been sitting in cold air, exposed to moisture and salt from his skin. But it looked newly honed, almost sharpened in its sleep. The edge shimmered faintly. And there, near the hilt, was something else. Black residue clung to the curve just above the guard, sticky and half-dried like coagulated tar. He touched it with a gloved finger and felt it resist him, as if it didn't want to be removed. It smelled like burned bone and sour ammonia, and left a faint sheen on the steel even after he wiped it clean with a cloth. He hadn't used the blade, he was sure of that, but something had. By the 12th night, fewer employees lingered on shift when he arrived. The break room lights remained dim past the usual hour, and the fork trucks no longer moved through the corridors by the time Ed made his way to the stairwell. When he asked the floor runner if shift times had changed, the man shrugged and told him they were adjusting staff for efficiency. No further details were offered. That night, Arturo Salazar failed to clock in. Ed had grown used to seeing Art near the shipping bay, sipping vending machine coffee and watching old YouTube clips on his cracked phone. They weren't friends, but they had spoken more than once. Art had mentioned a grandson once, some kid learning trombone, and had even given Ed a spare pair of gloves when his tour. When Ed asked about Art's absence, Delancey offered no real explanation. He quit, Delancey said. Didn't want the overtime. Simple as that. That might have been enough if Ed hadn't found Art's lunchbox. It sat just inside the alley near the foot of the scaffold stairs, half hidden beneath a pile of broken-down shipping cartons. Its thermos was missing, but the cloth napkin and apple still sat inside, along with a crusted sandwich and a picture of a boy holding a music case, bent slightly at the corners. Ed carried it back up with him and left it on the tray beside the book. When he finished his next reading, he placed the gloves Art had given him beside it. "Don't believe them," he whispered into the cracks. He had expected a response, mockery perhaps, or some new voice, but the door remained quiet, more so than it had been all week. The usual rustle of whispers felt muted, as though the voices behind the door had momentarily withdrawn, turning their attention elsewhere. He didn't know whether that was better or worse. By 4:15, Ed was sweating through his coat despite the cold. He had read the same corrupted page a dozen times now, and with each repetition the characters seemed to dig further into his mouth, carving grooves into his speech patterns, stealing the rhythm of how he thought. When he closed his eyes, he could see the script floating beneath his eyelids, swirling curves that pulled him inward. The door's cracks widened. One had split clean to the base of the frame, a jagged fault line that oozed faint light. The substance inside shimmered in slow, oscillating pulses like a heartbeat without a body. He reached toward it with the tip of the machete, unsure why, and watched the light lean toward the blade as if recognizing it. The residue reappeared, near the hilt. He pulled the weapon back and turned it over. The black smear had reformed in the exact same spot he'd cleaned earlier. A moment later, the voices returned. But this time they no longer begged. Instead, they spoke with purpose. "They don't tell you the truth, Ed. They never did. You're just a lock. You were never the key. There are people in here, real ones, forgotten, trafficked, bound by lies. You think that door keeps them out? It keeps us in." The tray beneath him creaked as he leaned forward, the machete remaining still in his hands. "You could help us. You could open it." He didn't answer, but he wanted to. Ed did not remember climbing the stairs that evening. The transition from the parking lot to the third-floor landing had passed without imprint. He found himself seated before the door, the tray beside him bare save for the warped book and the blade now blackened fully from hilt to tip. The surface shimmered faintly, even when he looked away from it, the way a dark shape lingers behind, the eyes after staring into headlights. He no longer bothered writing in the notebook. It had stopped being a record. Now it felt more like an invitation to scrutiny, something that would betray him if found and one day be read aloud. He had not spoken to anyone in over 36 hours. He hadn't left a message for his daughter. He had eaten nothing solid since a bowl of soup the day before. To make matters worse, he had not slept well. In the hours between shifts, his dreams had become less distinct from his waking thoughts, until both settled into a strange half-life of recurring images and whispered repetitions. Always the same door. Always a widening crack. Always the suggestion of fingers beckoning him through. And now, the voices were kind. They were no longer accusatory. They no longer wept. Instead, they consoled, with a gentleness that reminded him of the first days in hospice with his wife, when she had still been lucid enough to soothe him even as her body failed her. "You've done enough, Ed. We know you tried. It's not your fault. You couldn't have known. You were lied to just like we were, but you can still help us. You can still make this right." "Will it hurt?" he asked, no more than it already has. He stood up slowly, feeling each joint grind in protest. The cold had settled into his spine and knees, and yet there was a heat coming from the door itself, radiating outward in low waves that made his eyelids flutter and his gums ache. He approached the frame, the machete held loosely in one hand, the book left behind. He had no need for it now. The text had changed so many times that he had ceased to recognize it, and its cadence had become impossible to maintain. The door stood before him, silent and waiting. The cracks along its surface had widened to deep fissures, each glowing faintly, with the suggestion of a world beyond, though calling it a world felt dishonest. It was a movement, an undoing, a twisting of time and place. He raised his free hand and placed it against the metal, and found it warm to the touch. The voices sighed. "In relief, we forgive you. We see you. You were never the enemy. You were only the gate. He closed his eyes and reached for the seam with his fingertips, and then he was yanked backward, hard enough to send the machete clattering to the deck. The force came from behind, two hands gripping the back of his coat and hauling him away from the door with enough strength to spin him off balance. He stumbled, hit the railing with his shoulder, and wheeled to face the figure now standing between him and the cow. Seal. Delancey looked worse than Ed had ever seen him. His hair was wild and damp with sweat, his collar unbuttoned, and his eyes glassy with panic. He held the book open in both hands, his knuckles white, and he was already reading. The syllables poured from his mouth too quickly, the rhythm off, the pauses broken. He skipped lines, slurred endings, and doubled back on phrases that had already lost their structure. His voice cracked on the third stanza, and by the fifth he was stammering. The door began to hum. The sound was not mechanical. It was harmonic, deep, long, rising in volume with each fractured repetition of the book's cadence. Ed pressed himself to the railing and watched as the fissures across the door flared, white-blue at first, then dimming into a sickly, translucent amber that revealed more than he wanted to see. Behind the cracks, something moved, flowing across, a surface that should not have existed, crawling along the underside like ink dropped into water. The form had no bones, no organs, no discernible parts, but it moved with purpose, and it moved toward them. Delancey dropped the book. He stumbled backward and turned toward Ed, mouth open to shout something, perhaps an order, perhaps a prayer. He did not finish the sentence. The door did not open in any conventional sense. It did not swing or part. It peeled, the material of it unraveling with a sound like wet canvas being torn by gloved hands. The seam split, then split again, and something stepped, or poured, through. Ed could not describe it except to say that it was not of this world. Its mass shimmered and shifted, never fully resolving into any single shape. It had limbs, but they retracted and reformed. It had faces, but each vanished the moment he tried to count them. It stood and flowed simultaneously. It was both taller than the door and somehow flat against it. It entered without bending space and yet folded the landing inward with its weight. Delancey screamed. The sound was short, sharp, and final. His body collapsed inward, not as if he'd been pierced or consumed, but as if his very structure had been withdrawn. Bones dissolved beneath skin, and then the skin itself inflated, bloated with something that moved wrong beneath the surface. The corpse stood up. It turned to Ed with Delancey's face slackened and sagging, his lips torn at the corners, eyes sunk into black pits with faint blue filaments twitching across their surface. The thing holding him up, whatever had crawled inside, moved his arms in uneven, jerking motions like a broken marionette. It opened its mouth and spoke. Not with Delancey's voice, but with Ed's. You kept your promise. You held the line. Thank you for your service. The imitation curled the lips into a grin that split the cheeks open slightly, revealing no teeth, only the raw inside of an empty mask. Behind it, the door throbbed again, and something else followed. Part fit didn't take long. The moment the door peeled open and the things entered, time lost its shape. The fluorescent lighting along the third-floor landing snapped in rapid succession, one after the other, until Ed was left in darkness, fractured only by the pale, ambient light still emanating from the rent in the frame. The first figure, if it could even be called that, had only mocked Delancey's form as a temporary mask. Once it reached the stairs, its limbs split apart. A second figure, limbless and fluid, slithered up from the threshold, dragging behind it something that looked almost like a spine, but moved independently and flickered between visible and unseen. Like a film skipping frames, they passed by Ed without touching him. That fact alone sent a tremor through his legs. Not relief, not exactly. Something closer to resignation, tinged with the knowledge that he had been chosen or spared for a reason he didn't want to know. The first time the screaming began, it did not come from inside the factory. It came from the alley below. Dar crept forward and leaned over the edge of the scaffolding. His joints burned from the cold. from the strain of resisting the impulse to run or leap or simply close his eyes and surrender to the inevitable. Far below, near the loading dock entrance, he saw what remained of Greg Hiller, the night supervisor who always parked by the gate and never smiled at anyone. The man's body twitched in the sodium vapor light, each spasm more violent than the last. His limbs flailed independently, no longer controlled by any recognizable nervous system. His head lolled backward, mouth open in a gaping O, but no sound came out, only a dull, wet grinding like teeth being drawn across brick. The second scream, that of a woman, but irregularly high, came from inside. It was followed by shouts, the clatter of metal, and something akin to laughter, though Ed couldn't tell whether it came from the invaders or the men and women being consumed. He turned from the railing and descended the steps. The stairs no longer felt entirely stable. The metal flexed beneath his boots, not from age or wear, but from interference. Interference with what was. Space around the plant had softened, as though reality itself had been stretched taut and now trembled under the pressure of being violated. Inside, the corridor stank of vinegar, but now there was something else beneath it. Ozone, sulfur, the distinct chemical bite of something decaying rapidly and unnaturally. When he passed the break room, the window had cracked outward, as though something had burst from within. A mop bucket lay on its side nearby, but the water was no longer clear. It shimmered with colorless movement, as if filled with insects too, small to see. Ed found the book again near the base of the stairwell. It had fallen from Delancey's hand during the struggle, or perhaps it had been dropped on purpose, abandoned in the moment the cadence failed and the seal broke. Its cover was warped and steaming, as though recently removed from a fire. He knelt beside it, hands trembling, and opened it. Every single page was blank. What remained was the same dull beige as the fog now seeping through the corridors. He flipped through them with increasing speed, as if the act of turning might resummon the text. It did not. Somewhere to his right, a door exploded outward. A man staggered through it, holding one arm against his chest, the other hand pressed to the side of his head. His mouth moved, lips fluttering, but nothing came out. The man's knees buckled and he fell. As he hit the ground, Ed could see his mouth had sealed shut, grown over with new skin. Jubilant, exultant voices emerged again from behind a nearby ventilation duct. These voices were not like the suggestive, coaxing ones from the door, but joyous. And Ed knew, as if via some buried ancient instinct, that it was not joy for the victims, but of release. He stepped over the man's twitching body and pressed, onward, drawn toward the north side of the plant by forces he didn't understand, toward the windows that faced the field and the tree line. The screams were fewer now, as though the process had advanced, and what was left required no further resistance. When he reached the factory's double doors, they stood open. The security latch had been sheared clean off, not broken or twisted, but entirely erased, as though the concept of the latch had been deleted from existence. Beyond the doorway, the gravel lot shimmered with the same unstable haze that had leaked from the book and the door before it. The vehicles parked in their crooked lines were half melted. One of the trucks now bore two fronts, joined cab to cab, its tires bent inward in unnatural angles that defied any understanding of mechanics. Ed stepped out onto the gravel and felt something give way beneath his boot. He looked down and found that he had crushed a length of long, narrow bone, sharpened to a point at one end. It resembled a rib, but not one belonging to anything that should walk upright. He did not recoil, and kept walking. The sun rose slowly, though rose was the wrong word. It emerged, bleeding into view not from the horizon but from above it, descending slowly at first, then halting midway through its motion as if confused about its own trajectory. Its light was red, not a hazy, warm red, but raw, a hemorrhage of radiance that painted the sky in strokes of coagulated color. The clouds that drifted across it did not move with the wind. They curled instead, inverting upon themselves, spiraling inward toward a single point that had no fixed location. Sirens wailed in the distance. They were not the shriek of ambulances or fire trucks. These had a different pitch, less urgent and more ceremonial, with long tones that rose and fell. Ed recognized them in the same way one recognizes a melody once heard in a dream. It wasn't an emergency signal. It was a summoning. Something passed overhead, large and unseen, its winged shadow stretched across the lot. It lingered briefly, and in its presence, the world seemed to hesitate. He looked back at the building and discovered the door was gone. The third floor still bore the landing. The scaffolding remained rusted and crooked, but the wall had healed. The cut that had once housed the strange door was now seamless brick, as though it had never been opened, never even existed. Ed said nothing. He walked to his car. The Buick had survived, though the passenger side mirror now hung from its hinge like a broken finger. The radio buzzed when he turned the key, filling the cabin with the sound of static filtered through deep underwater clicks. He let it play. He drove until the factory disappeared in the mirror. The road ahead was quiet, but something followed, not in the rear view or on the highway, but in him. The words from the book, long forgotten by the world, had been transferred, and still resonated deeply within. Unfortunately for Ed, they did not vanish with the ink. And as the horizon loomed, Ed understood the truth. The opening of the door had never been a singular event, but a test, and others now were waiting.
Before we slip into the next haunting story, where true horror stories and real creepy encounters whisper through the night. Like this video to keep the nightmares coming, and leave a comment. Where in the world are you nestled, listening to my voice? Are you feeling sleepy, ready to drift off? Or do my tales make you fear what might be watching as you close your eyes? Sweet dreams, or perhaps not.
The Rift. Threshold Dynamics did not appear on any public registry. The company had no website, no press releases, and no shareholders, at least not in the conventional sense. It existed at the intersection of dark research grants, untraceable, contracts, and deniable oversight. Nestled deep in the northern wilds of an unnamed region bordering 3 national parks, it was a ghost company, moving with surgical precision through bureaucratic loopholes that left no trace behind. And it had been granted exactly what it wanted: isolation, silence, and the freedom to experiment. Dr. Arden Vale stood at the edge of the site's temporary scaffold platform, gazing out over the pine forest that rolled and dipped across the valley below like a sea of jagged black. Wind swept up from the ravine, cold and sharp, rattling the aluminum supports around her and tugging strands of hair from the braid knotted tightly against the base of her neck. Behind her, massive ceramic capacitors hummed low as they idled, each of them feeding into the buried latticework of the dimensional rift generator, her life's work, born from 17 years of math, theory, and funding from people who never asked what she was trying to reach. She preferred it that way. From the temporary comms tent, a voice crackled through her earpiece. "We're 15 minutes out, Dr. Vale. The escort's nearly at checkpoint Delta." She touched her earpiece to respond, her voice clipped but clear. "Copy. Bring them in slowly. Don't let the vehicles idle near the field. I don't want any more interference than we already have." Arden turned and stepped down the aluminum stairs, her boots landing on packed gravel lined with coiled power cables and plastic sheeting. A thin layer of frost coated everything, despite the mild forecast. Temperature fluctuations like that had become common in the zone. The instruments called it an inverted thermal bloom, but she had other names for it, names she didn't say aloud. At the outer perimeter, just beyond the second electrified fence, a convoy of black SUVs crawled along the switchback trail, tires crunching the ground slowly. One vehicle bore a bright orange triangle on the hood, marking it as civilian. Inside sat Maxine Holt, hands gripping the wheel with the ease of someone used to navigating unpaved roads and uneven terrain. She'd been briefed in exactly the way Threshold Dynamics liked to handle outsiders: vague, authoritative, and with the promise of hazard pay if she asked no questions. She already had questions. The forest had changed since she'd last passed. Through it 2 years ago. It was subtle at first. The color of the pines had dulled in places and birds were few and far between. Branches sagged as if under unseen weight. Tree trunks closer to the project zone bore deep spiral cracks, as though something had twisted them from within and left them to rot upright. Maxine stopped at the second checkpoint, where a man in a reinforced vest scanned her ID and made her wait while he checked with the command tent. He didn't smile. She didn't either. When the gates parted, she drove slowly up the gravel road toward the clearing, where the core structure of Threshold's operations loomed above the forest floor in a tangled mess of scaffold, cable, and generators that never quite stopped vibrating. It looked more like preparation for war than science. Inside the main control tent, Arden met her with a nod but offered no handshake. "Ms. Holt, thank you for coming on short notice." Maxine surveyed the cluttered interior, maps pinned to corkboard, monitors showing oscillating energy readouts, and personnel walking with too much purpose for a research station. "I wasn't told what I'd be escorting." "You're not escorting anything," Arden replied, turning back toward the inner corridor of the tent. "You're here in case something gets out." Maxine followed her in silence, boots thudding softly against the reinforced flooring. "You planning for that?" she asked, more a statement than a question. "I plan for everything," Arden replied. "But in this case, the risk is theoretical." Maxine said nothing. She had the sense this woman had long ago stopped believing in theory. They passed into the observation dome, an open-sided tent ringed with high-powered scopes and field displays. At its center sat the core itself, encased in an obsidian black shell. Mounted above it was a rig of refractive sensors and Tesla coils, linked in a toroidal array that manipulated ambient energy. At Arden's signal, a technician keyed in the final sequence. "We're breaching in 10 minutes, Arden said. "What you're about to see will change everything about our understanding of spatial entanglement." Maxine didn't care about the science. She watched the forest. The trees were no longer swaying in the wind. In fact, the wind had stopped. Entirely. When the surge occurred, the air did not explode or ripple. Rather, it became still, so profoundly still that even breath felt intrusive. A shrill hum rose to the edge of hearing, and the obsidian shell began to open, unfolding itself. At first nothing happened, but then the mist along the valley floor parted. Across the ravine, perhaps 3 miles distant, something enormous breached the tree line, slowly and silently with no visible force behind it. Maxine blinked, unsure whether her mind was reacting to the breach or if the thing before her was real. It was a head, human in shape and vaguely feminine, but scaled impossibly, beyond comprehension, stone-like in appearance. Its crown emerged first, hair trailing in black tendrils like oil through water. Then its eyes, 2 cavernous hollows filled with pulsating red light, emerged through the fog and settled just above the horizon, tilted downward as though watching them. The forest beneath it did not react. No trees snapped, no animals fled. But those who stood nearby found themselves frozen in place. Even Arden's voice wavered. "Mark the visual anomaly. Record all sensor data. No one is to attempt contact." But Maxine was already backing away. She wasn't even thinking of the pay anymore. Her instincts, honed over years of trekking through country too wild to care who lived or died in it, were screaming one unified message. Whatever had just been unleashed had been waiting a long time. Behind her, Arden stood rooted, numbers flooding. Her mind, her mouth silently forming equations only she could follow. Far above and impossibly close, the giant's eyes glowed brighter, and its gaze narrowed. The head never moved. It remained perched above the forest, its immense form anchored in fog and stillness, as though balanced against the curvature of the world itself. The horizon bent around it. Its dark hair continued to stream downward in strands too straight to be windblown, trailing through the mist. But the feature that gripped everyone, no matter how trained, how analytical, how skeptical, was the glow of its eyes. Its twin crimson orbs did not radiate light as expected. Instead, they pulsed, striking the retina in a way that refused to integrate with depth perception. No one could agree on how far away the head was. Some said 5 miles. Others claimed it was close enough to see pores in the skin. Dr. Arden Vale stood beneath the canopy of the makeshift command dome, her gaze locked through the mounted ocular lens of the forward scope. Around her, engineers ran diagnostics, logged data, and performed retinal recalibrations. Anything to feel as though they still controlled the situation. Arden knew they didn't. She didn't say it aloud, but the realization had already begun, weaving through her thoughts. Visual coherence degrading past the 180-second mark, said Haru Kim, her lead instrumentation analyst. Observer fatigue increasing exponentially. We're seeing early signs of disorientation and word slippage. Arden blinked slowly and stepped back from the scope. Cycle out observers, every 2 minutes. Keep logs of subjective reports as well as biometric telemetry. I want everything on record. Kim hesitated before nodding. Yes, Doctor. Beyond the field tent, the entity loomed unchanged. No one had seen it rise, and no one could say for sure whether it had emerged or had simply always been there, veiled until the breach pulled back the curtain. The lack of motion defied expectation more than any roar or earth-shaking step could have. Something that large should move. It should tower and tremble the ground with every breath. But this stillness was a more profound violation. It was watching, and it did not need to move to reach you. By the second day of exposure, symptoms began appearing in clusters. Workers reported vivid dreams in which they were being pulled upward by unseen hands, slowly unspooled like yarn. One man became convinced he had never existed before arriving at the site. Another tried to dig into the earth with his bare hands, claiming something below was whispering the equations Arden had recited during the breach. Sleep became difficult. Time became elastic. Maxine began checking her watch hourly, not to tell time, but to prove that it still existed. Roland Kess arrived on the third day, his unmarked transport sliding quietly through the checkpoint without fanfare. His demeanor remained cold but attentive, the kind of man who had seen everything he was supposed to believe was classified. After being briefed by two of Arden's liaisons, both of whom repeated nearly identical phrases without deviation, he requested to speak with the director herself. He found her not in the command tent, but seated alone near the observation ridge with a field notebook open in her lap, eyes half-lidded as she stared toward the ridge where the being remained. Her pencil moved without pause, inviting attention as she sketched spirals and mirrored loops. "You've seen it, I take it," he said by way of introduction. Arden did not look up. "I've studied it." Roland moved beside her, keeping the being just out of his direct line of sight. "Studied, but not explained." "I'm not sure explanation is the point." Roland folded his arms. "I've reviewed your chain of command reports. They're incomplete, contradictory in places. One report states the breach occurred at 0500. Another lists it as 1300 hours. There's mention of a technician named Mallory who assisted with the calibration sequence, but no one on staff remembers him. His clearance file is empty." Arden smiled faintly without turning her head. "We brought back more than expected." Roland frowned. "We didn't bring anything back, Dr. Vale. We opened a tear in something we don't understand. And now half your crew is reporting neurological drift, and the other half can't remember who they are." She finally looked at him. "Yet you're here." "I go where the contract tells me." "Do you feel it yet?" "I feel the unease of a man standing too close to a cliff. That's all." Arden returned to her notebook. "It will get closer." Roland walked away without responding, but the knot in his stomach remained. It tightened when he passed by the mess tent and saw a young assistant stirring coffee with his index finger, unaware that his hand was submerged in liquid several degrees below freezing. No one else noticed. No one wanted to. That night, a perimeter technician named Bradley Vire left for a standard loop check. He did not return. His absence was noted by the quartermaster at 0117, though the time was later disputed. Logs showed he had never checked out. Security footage revealed nothing. His cot remained untouched. Maxine was the first to raise alarm, having spoken with Bradley shortly before his patrol. She insisted he had joked about the temperature and borrowed her scarf. Arden denied any breach. When pressed, she offered no explanation for the missing footage. "It's not a breach," she said. "It's a transference." "What the hell does that mean?" Maxine asked. "It means Bradley's somewhere else now." "Is he alive?" Arden didn't answer. The next morning, the scarf was found hanging from a pine branch 15 feet above the ground, twisted into a knot that mirrored the pattern Arden had been sketching. Maxine stared at it for several seconds before finally speaking. "I don't think the forest appreciates our presence." No one argued. By midday, communications began to break down. Satellite uplink failed. Power flickered in intervals that did not align with known patterns. The head remained motionless, yet its gaze seemed to deepen. At 1942, someone entered the north gate on foot. He was barefoot and pale, carried no tools, and had no visible injuries. His gait was fluid but unhurried. He did not speak. When halted by armed personnel, he raised his hands and complied without resistance. His clothing was standard issue for site workers: dark thermals, worn boots, insulated vest. But his boots were gone. His name tag was missing. His ID badge had been found hours earlier, still clipped to a broken branch. Arden arrived as he was being questioned. "Do you know who you are?" she asked. The man blinked once and turned his head toward the ridge. "I am the vessel," he said, voice calm, eyes glassy. "It has asked to speak." "What is it?" Arden asked. "You already know." Behind them, the glow intensified, and somewhere in the ridgeline of their minds, something stirred. The man closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they reflected red. They did not know what to call him at first. There was no identification left on his person, and the badge found earlier could not be reliably matched to his face, which now bore an expression of such vacant serenity that it seemed artificial. Arden referred to him only as the subject in her preliminary notes, but the others began calling him the vessel, in lieu of his earlier comments, and the name stuck. He did not object. In truth, he did not speak much at all. When he did, however, the effect was immediate and unsettling. He uttered things he should not have known. Lines from encrypted personnel files, locker combinations, fragments of conversations spoken days earlier in confidence and behind closed tent flaps. At one point, he interrupted a diagnostic technician, mid-report, to inform her, without prompt, that her mother had died that morning thousands of miles away. The next satellite ping confirmed it. Most disturbing of all was the voice. It remained his, at least in timbre and volume, but there was a pressure behind it, a low-frequency vibration that made skin prickle and teeth ache. Observers reported headaches, nausea, and, in one instance, temporary aphasia after extended proximity. Roland imposed a strict 5-minute exposure limit for any personnel assigned to monitor him. Arden ignored it. She sat across from the vessel in the far end of the medical tent, a notepad balanced on her knee, her eyes fixed on the gentle rise and fall of his chest. Electrodes trailed from his scalp to a bank of portable scanners, each one logging brain activity in a chaotic bloom of overlapping waves that defied explanation. Despite the impossibility of it, the data remained consistent. Wrong, but consistently so. "You're processing input in channels I can't map," she murmured. The vessel did not respond, but his eyes remained open and unblinking. They were deeply red around the irises, as though backlit by something watching from within. "You're communicating without speech," Arden continued. "I think you're already filtering us, choosing what to show." Still, nothing. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "What is the purpose of your presence?" His lips parted. "To hold what you cannot." Arden nodded. "Containment." The vessel tilted his head slightly. "Understanding." "Of us?" "No, of hunger." That evening, Roland isolated himself in the communications trailer and replayed the voice logs from his first interview with Arden. He listened for tone shifts, inflection changes, and inconsistencies. He played them twice, then a third time, comparing them with his memory. The problem wasn't that they were wrong. The problem was that the second and third playbacks differed from each other, subtly but unmistakably. He replayed the same clip again and again. Each time the phrasing changed, only by a word or the placement of a pause, but it was enough. He opened the metadata. Time of recording, not listed. File size, 0 kilobytes. He played it again. This time, Arden didn't speak at all. Roland slammed the laptop shut and pressed his palms into his eyes. When he opened them, the screen was blank and a face stared back. Only it wasn't his. It was his daughter's. He staggered back, catching himself on the wall. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. Then the image faded, returning to static. No trace remained. He left the trailer without speaking to anyone and returned to his quarters, where he found her again. His daughter, 9 years old, sitting on his bunk with knees drawn to her chest, looking just as she had the last time he saw her before the illness took her. He stood in the doorway, unable to move or speak. "Daddy," she said, "I missed you." The next morning, he filed no report. Instead, he returned to the field perimeters and walked the entire north sector twice, eyes never leaving the horizon. The head remained fixed in its place, and though it had not moved, Roland could no longer convince himself it had not noticed him. Maxine had stopped sleeping. It began with fragments, dreams of snowfields stained with ink, forests where the trees leaned in clusters, their branches hooked like fingers as if colluding. But the dreams became deeper, longer, and soon indistinguishable from waking. In one, she found herself running across the valley, arms outstretched, only to realize her limbs were comprised of bark and sinew. She felt her body rooting itself into the soil as her breath slowed and her thoughts became still water. When she woke, she vomited pine needles into the sink. By mid-week, she tried to leave the compound entirely. She packed a light kit, strapped her rifle, and set out along the marked trail she had helped map herself. An hour in, the path twisted back on itself. 2 hours later, she found her own boot prints heading in the opposite direction. When she looked up, she noticed the stars above were too bright, and that they were in the wrong places. Orion had 2 belts. Cassiopeia curved downward like a hook. The forest had changed. The land now moved in loops. She returned, silent and pale. Arden did not question her. Arden, for her part, had been building something in the lower research tent, something no one else had clearance to see. Using parts stripped from drone kits, memory rigs, and feedback isolation gear, she assembled a neural interface of her own design. No one approved it. She hadn't asked. She believed the entity desired contact, not with the body, but with consciousness. She believed it was not hostile, only dispersed, too large to communicate via traditional channels, too alien to enter minds uninvited. The vessel, she theorized, was its outstretched finger, but a finger required a willing touch to complete the gesture. When she announced her intention to initiate contact, Roland objected immediately. "You don't know what it wants," he said. "You don't know what this thing is, and whatever's inside that man is using you." Arden did not raise her voice. "There's no difference between use and communion. Not anymore. If this is some messianic delusion, you need to pull back before you destroy what's left of your team." But Arden was already fitting the interface nodes to her temples, calibrating the relay with fingers trembling from lack of sleep. Maxine arrived without being summoned. She stood silently at the edge of the tent as Arden seated, herself before the vessel, wires trailing from her scalp to his wrists. "You should know," Maxine said quietly. "It's been dreaming, too." Arden met her gaze. "That's what I'm counting on." The interface activated. The moment the circuit closed, Arden's vision narrowed. The world collapsed into a tunnel of shadow and red light, and her ears filled with a rushing sound. Images surged through her mind. Not memories, but recognitions, as though something behind her own thoughts had begun flipping through her life without regard for sequence or meaning. She saw her childhood bedroom, lit by the green glow of an old digital clock. She saw her father's lab, cluttered and smelling of burnt ozone. and the expression on his face when he first realized something had gone wrong. She saw herself, younger and idealistic, delivering lectures to rooms of glassy-eyed bureaucrats who nodded without hearing a word. All of it shimmered, then inverted. Language flooded her thoughts, not in words but in arrangements of possibility, pattern after pattern folding into one another. There was hunger there, yes, but also awe. The entity was not seeking destruction. It was seeking a way to be heard in a universe that had no instruments capable of detecting its voice. Arden opened her mouth. The vessel did the same. In unison, they spoke. "We are listening." The trees began to spiral, not in dramatic whirls or grotesque contortions, but in gentle, nearly imperceptible curves that became evident only when viewed from a distance. Maxine noticed first, pacing the northeast ridge at sunrise, where pines tilted in a slow arc that followed the line of sight back toward the observation platform. What had once been a straight perimeter trail now veered and doubled, with saplings emerging in geometric clusters, 5-pointed arrays, Fibonacci spirals, and curling helixes of bark and branch that defied natural growth patterns. The terrain felt unfamiliar, even where she had walked just days before. The earth sloped differently. Elevation rose where it once fell. Deer tracks moved in impossible loops, and frost coated the shadowed sides of trees regardless of the sun's direction. Even sound behaved strangely. Bird calls echoed from directions where no birds perched, and footsteps returned on delay, sometimes repeating as whispers. Maxine stopped walking and raised her compass. The needle spun slowly, then shuddered and fixed on north. 2 seconds later, it reversed. She frowned and pulled her phone from her vest pocket, accessing the offline satellite map she had downloaded before entering the zone. The map showed a ridgeline she recognized, flanked by 3 rivers and a logging road that had long since been swallowed by undergrowth. She turned in place, aligning the terrain with the topography, but the land no longer matched. The rivers were gone. The ridgeline bent the wrong way. She lowered the phone and looked toward the valley. The head still loomed, motionless, vast, and unchanging, dominating every line of perspective. No matter how she turned, the entity's face followed. It had become the axis around which the world now revolved. When Maxine returned to camp, Arden was waiting. "You've seen it, haven't you?" the doctor asked, her voice calm but electric. Maxine hesitated. "The land's wrong." "It isn't wrong. It's reorganizing." Arden held up a sheet of paper. It was a scan of sensor data overlaid with topographic mapping, annotated with symbols Maxine did not recognize, some scientific, others bordering on mystical. At the center was a waveform oscillating around a shifting fulcrum that expanded with each cycle. "It's building a framework," Arden continued. "Not with matter, but with thought. We're inside it now, not physically, but perceptually." "You think that's a good thing?" Maxine asked, her voice flat. "I think it's inevitable," Arden replied. She turned and led Maxine toward the modified observation rig that had replaced the original containment core. The equipment had been altered beyond recognition. Screens now displayed real-time overlays of biological patterns interlaced with feedback from Arden's neural interface. One monitor synchronized with the vessel's respiration. Another displayed rolling streams of code that read more like poetry than programming, looping in mirrored sentences that folded and refolded into themselves. Roland stood nearby, arms crossed, eyes sunken with exhaustion. "She's going to try it again," he said without preamble. This time without limiters. Maxine didn't answer. She watched Arden adjust the final relay. "She thinks it wants to merge," Roland added. Arden glanced over her shoulder. "Not merge, harmonize. You're thinking in binary terms. This isn't about control." "What is it about then?" Arden's voice softened. "It wants to know, and to be known." The vessel sat in a high-backed chair, silent, wires running from his skull to the modified relay system. His skin was pale, his lips parted in a breathless whispers. His eyes, still lit from within by a dull red glow, tracked Arden's movements, with the patience of a being that understood time differently. He hadn't slept. No one knew if he needed to. Arden fitted the final nodes to her temples and sat across from him. "You can't understand something like this by staying outside it," she said. "You have to allow it access to your structure." Roland took a step forward. "You're not prepared for this. You don't know what it'll do to your mind." "I've spent my life preparing," she replied. "And it's not doing anything. It's just existing. We're the ones contorting to understand." "That's the problem," Roland snapped. "It isn't speaking our language. It's writing its own inside you." Arden closed her eyes and activated the interface. Immediately, the tense lights dimmed and the hum of the generators shifted pitch. The relay's primary coil began to glow faintly, and screens blinked into static before reorganizing themselves into recursive geometric shapes. The vessel exhaled slowly. Arden inhaled once, then fell still. Maxine moved to intervene, but Roland held up a hand. "Not yet." What followed was not a seizure, though it resembled one. Arden's fingers twitched, her lips trembled, and her eyes rolled beneath her lids. Data streamed from the interface in increasingly erratic waves, spikes, troughs, and errant loops that broke the machine's calibration models. Her brain was rewriting itself faster than the system could log. Suddenly, Arden sat upright. Her eyes were open, but they no longer focused. Her voice came out dual-toned, as if layered over itself. "Structure acknowledged," she said. "Barriers eroding." She turned her head toward Roland. "You are incomplete." Maxine stepped forward. "Arden, you need to stop." "I am not Arden," the voice replied. "She remains, but is assimilating." Roland pulled his sidearm from his belt and approached slowly. "You said it was communion, not possession." "There is no possession, only architecture." The vessel stood in unison with Arden, mirroring her posture. Roland raised the weapon. "If you've taken her from us, I swear to God—" "You are swearing to no one," the voice said gently. Roland fired. The bullet stopped midair, hovering between them. Then it fell. Roland stumbled backward, his hand trembling. His vision blurred, and the air around him fractured. He felt memory leak through his awareness. Disjointed images of childhood days that never occurred. Glimpses of events still to come. People he had never met speaking his name in languages he had never learned. Maxine caught him as he collapsed to one knee. "Stay with me," she whispered, gripping his shoulders. But Roland could no longer speak. He opened his mouth and only fragments emerged. Arden stepped forward. "This was not conquest," she said. "It was an invitation." She reached toward Maxine. "You are the last door." Maxine backed away. "No," she said. "You were always going to say that," the voice replied. "But I had to ask." The vessel and Arden turned in unison and walked toward the edge of the platform. Beyond them, the forest had begun to shimmer. Trees bled into the sky. The clouds moved in reverse. The head above the valley glowed brighter, and for the first time, something changed. Its lips parted. Inside the opening, there were no teeth, only a spiraling corridor of mirrors, each surface reflecting a different version of the world. Maxine stood frozen as Arden's form shimmered. Her edges softened, then restructured. For a brief moment, she seemed made of script. Rows of curling characters that rotated in sequence before folding inward, vanishing in a burst of impossible geometry. The vessel followed. Then there was silence. The forest settled. The equipment powered down. Roland sat curled on the ground, muttering phrases in a language that bent time around sound. Maxine stepped to the platform edge and looked out. The head still loomed. Its gaze remained fixed, but it no longer needed to reach. It had become the space, and they had helped it remember the shape of the door through which it had entered. The forest was quiet again. A survey drone swept low across the valley, transmitting heat signatures to a secure uplink that no longer existed. Its onboard camera recorded pine canopy, scrub, and fog, nothing unusual. The field where the Threshold Dynamics compound had once stood was overgrown, The scaffold removed, the generators gone. No satellite records marked the facility. No roads remained visible from above. The drone's logs would later be reviewed by an automated system tasked with monitoring atmospheric radiation in disused government zones. It flagged no anomalies. It also failed to record the moment the drone's reflection appeared in the air 5 meters above its own body, lagging half a second behind. Official records stated that the site had been decommissioned following the withdrawal of funding. No reason was listed, no incident report filed. FOIA requests returned with redacted blocks and template responses citing expired clearances. Attempts to trace threshold dynamics led to disconnected phone numbers, expired domains, and offshore holding companies that folded within weeks of inquiry. The name Arden Vale appeared briefly in one academic journal. An article on dimensional topology later pulled for formatting inconsistencies. The author profile linked to no institution. The portrait was blank. And yet, the land remembered. A pair of hikers from an outlying township wandered into the valley late in October, following a trail that did not appear on modern maps. Yet they found no buildings or roads. At the river's edge, they watched curiously as the water ran uphill briefly, before resuming its natural course. They did not return the way they came. One claimed they had been followed by something just out of sight. The other refused to speak about the trip entirely. When prompted, she insisted she had never gone hiking in that area, despite photographic evidence to the contrary. Elsewhere, a retired contractor in Michigan suffered a stroke during breakfast. When he awoke 2 days later, he spoke a phrase repeatedly to his daughter before slipping into a coma. He said, "The door was made of mirrors, and I couldn't find the frame." No one knew what he meant. In the weeks that followed the event, Maxine remained off-grid. She traveled west by train, avoiding digital records, changing aliases, and moved through towns as though haunted by something she could neither name nor explain. At night, she dreamed of forests she had never explored, mouth-like valleys and colossal visages rising against the sky. She kept a journal, though the ink often faded by morning. Once she found pages she hadn't written, filled with curved symbols that vaguely resembled letters. She burned them all. Some nights she woke convinced she was no longer the sole occupant of her body. She never spoke to Roland again. His fate was uncertain. Witnesses claimed he boarded a cargo plane under a false name 2 days after the final incident. The flight's manifest was later lost. No one at the receiving airport remembered seeing him disembark. His apartment in Maryland remained untouched. Rent payments continued for 4 months and then stopped. The landlord entered the unit to find a message scrawled hastily on the bedroom ceiling with what appeared to be permanent marker. It read, "I remember things that haven't happened yet. I don't want to." The landlord did not call the police. He simply painted over the message and rented the apartment to someone else. The new tenant complained of vivid dreams and insomnia, but chose not to move out. In Washington, a clerk in the Geological Survey Department flagged a series of magnetic anomalies centered on a cluster of remote wilderness regions, one of which included the former breach site. When she presented the findings to her supervisor, she was told to shelve the report. 3 days later, her system credentials were revoked. When she protested, she was informed she had never been employed there. She still receives voicemail messages with only static and distant whispering. She no longer answers her phone. In the heart of the valley, the air remains dense in ways no barometer can measure. On mornings when the fog rolls in from the east, shapes appear for seconds at a time. Massive, slow-moving silhouettes with curves too perfect to be natural. Photographers sometimes capture them by accident. Most delete the images, convinced they've glitched the sensor, and yet once in a while one photograph surfaces, passed around forums, dissected, dismissed as a hoax, and re-edited into artwork. But those who spend too long staring into the grainy outline, especially if they invert the contrast, soon begin to dream of faces with stone-like skin and unblinking eyes. The image always finds its way back to obscurity. The being itself no longer appears in full, not all at once, but traces remain. Distorted, inaccurate reflections ripple in puddles near the valley floor. Trees lean in gentle curves, The sky folds subtly where the head once appeared, like fabric pressed too long against a sharp edge. People feel watched in places where no one is present. Children sometimes wake from sleep in tears, claiming they heard a woman's voice reciting their name. On the winter solstice, a freelance surveyor crossing through the valley alone reported hearing the word home repeated in his own voice, though he hadn't spoken. He continued walking, but eventually stopped when his shadow split in two and then rejoined, the light no longer reflecting it properly afterward. Later, when interviewed by a forest ranger, he claimed he saw something that wasn't there and never was, but always would be. The ranger filed no report. That section of the forest was already listed as restricted, and on one fog-choked morning, a boy from a nearby township strayed from a family hiking path and wandered too close to the tree line. His mother found him standing still, eyes fixed on nothing. "What are you looking at?" she asked. The boy tilted his head. "I think it sees us." She followed his gaze. There was only mist. She turned to lead him away. Behind them, in the distance, faint and far too large to be real, a silhouette emerged, vague and nearly translucent. Its eyes opened, and a voice came, as if on the wind, from nowhere and everywhere, all at once. "I see you."